After my apartment burned down, I called my parents hoping they would help. My dad did not even sound worried. He just said, "Not our problem," and told me I should have been more careful before hanging up. I was still trying to process the shock when the police showed up at my motel door the next morning. One officer asked me a question that made my stomach drop. "Do you know who had access to your apartment last week?" I told him it must have been a tragic accident caused by old wiring. I thought the worst was already over. Then they showed me the security footage. Someone had been inside, someone I trusted, and what the cameras revealed left me completely speechless. Before I tell you who was holding the match, do me a favor. If you have ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, hit that like button. Let me know in the comments if you think family is defined by blood or by loyalty. My name is Chloe. At 3 a.m. last Tuesday, I was standing on the wet pavement of 4th Avenue in Seattle, watching my life turn into ash. The heat was unbearable even from across the street. Sirens wailed, drowning out the sound of breaking glass. That was my living room window shattering. I stood there shivering in just my silk pajamas and a trench coat I had grabbed from the rack by the door. Everything else was gone. My laptop with 5 years of forensic audit data, my passport, the vintage watch my grandmother left me. All of it was feeding the orange beast roaring in front of me. Most people in this situation would be crying hysterically. They would be screaming at the firefighters to save their photo albums. I did not scream. I stood perfectly still. My mind was already categorizing the losses into a spreadsheet. Furniture depreciated value $4,000. Electronics replacement cost $3,000. Emotional value 0 because emotions do not have a line item on a balance sheet. My hands were shaking not from the cold, but from the adrenaline. I clutched my phone. It was the only thing I had saved. It had 12% battery left. I stared at the contact named Father. I hesitated. I knew what Richard Sterling was like. He was a man who measured affection in stock options and quarterly returns, but surely a burning building qualified as an emergency. I pressed call. It rang 4 times. I imagined the sound echoing in the master suite of their $10 million estate in Medina just 20 minutes away. That house had 12 bedrooms and a heated pool. My apartment was a 500-square-foot studio that I paid for with my own salary. I had never asked them for a dime since the day I graduated. But tonight I had no cash. I had no ID. I had no choice. Finally the line connected. I heard the rustle of high thread count sheets. "What is it, Chloe?" His voice was thick with sleep and irritation. He did not ask if I was okay. He asked what I wanted. "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My apartment. The building is on fire. I am on the street. I have nowhere to go." There was a pause. I expected shock. I expected him to say he was sending the driver. Instead, I heard a heavy sigh. The kind of sigh he made when a waiter brought him the wrong wine at a country club dinner. "This is exactly why I told you not to live in that dumpster fire of a neighborhood," he said. His voice was crisp now, devoid of empathy. "You insisted on being independent, Chloe. You wanted to play the struggling martyr instead of taking your place at the firm like your brother Julian. Well, this is what independence looks like. It is messy and it is inconvenient." I gripped the phone tighter. My knuckles turned white. "Dad, please," I whispered. "I am barefoot. I just need a room for the night. I will be gone by morning." "Do not be ridiculous," he snapped. "Your mother has a charity gala tomorrow morning. She needs her rest. We cannot have you dragging the smell of smoke and failure into the house at this hour. Go to a motel. Use that emergency fund you are always bragging about. This is not our problem." The line went dead. I looked at the black screen. I did not cry. Crying does not book a hotel room. Crying does not file an insurance claim. I grew up in a house where emotions were considered a weakness and silence was a weapon. Richard and Sylvia Sterling had trained me well. I put the phone in my pocket. I looked back at the burning building. The firefighters were shouting orders. I stepped closer to the police line. I needed to document this. I lifted my phone and snapped 3 photos of the flames consuming my 4th-floor unit. I needed proof for the insurance adjuster. I needed a paper trail. If my parents would not help me, I would rely on the only thing that never lied to me: the numbers. I turned my back on the fire and started walking toward the nearest 24-hour cafe. I had to charge my phone. I had to survive. But as I walked away, I had no idea that the fire was just the beginning. The real burn was coming tomorrow when Detective Miller would knock on my door. The walk to the Grand Hyatt took me 40 minutes. My bare feet were bleeding inside my loafers, but I did not stop. The trench coat hid my silk pajamas, but it could not hide the smell of smoke clinging to my hair. I looked like a disaster, but I walked with the posture of a woman who managed multi-million-dollar audits. I had a platinum credit card in my pocket. It was an extension of my father's corporate account. I had never used it for personal expenses, not once in 8 years. I kept it only for emergencies. Tonight was the definition of an emergency. I walked into the lobby. The marble floors reflected the crystal chandeliers. The night manager looked up from his computer. His eyes scanned me from my soot-stained forehead to my designer shoes. He wrinkled his nose. I approached the desk and placed the black card on the counter. "I need a room," I said. My voice was raspy from the smoke. "Just for tonight." The manager picked up the card with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "Do you have identification, madam?" he asked. "I lost it in a fire," I replied calmly. "My name is Chloe Sterling. You can verify the card number. It is linked to the Sterling estate holdings." He hesitated but swiped the card. I watched his face. I expected the usual polite nod. Instead, I saw a frown. He swiped it again. He typed something into his terminal. "I am sorry, madam," he said, sliding the card back to me. "This card has been reported lost or stolen. The issuer has placed a hard block on it. Please leave before I call security." I stood frozen. I checked the time on the wall clock. It was 3:45 a.m. My father had hung up the phone at 3:12 a.m. It took him exactly 33 minutes to log into the banking portal and deactivate my emergency access. He did not just refuse to help me. He actively cut my lifeline while I was walking through the streets in the middle of the night. This was not a lesson. This was a siege. I took the card back. I did not argue with the manager. I did not make a scene. I walked out of the revolving doors back into the cold Seattle mist. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my wallet. I counted the cash, $84.50. That was my net worth right now. The irony was suffocating. I managed audits for Fortune 500 companies. I had found missing assets totaling $12 million for a client just last week. But my personal savings were tied up in high-yield term deposits that I could not access without 2-factor authentication from the laptop that was currently melting in my apartment. I kept walking. The Grand Hyatt was behind me. I headed toward the outskirts of downtown, where the streetlights flickered and the tourists did not go. I thought about my brother Julian. Last month, Julian crashed his Porsche into a parked police cruiser while high on prescription pills. The bail was $50,000. The lawyer fees were another $30,000. My father paid it all within an hour. He called it a youthful indiscretion. Julian is 32 years old. When Julian needed money, it was an investment in his potential. When I needed shelter from a fire, it was a burden. I found a place called the Starlight Motel. The neon sign was missing the letter L, making it read the Starlight. The clerk was behind bulletproof glass. He did not ask for ID. He did not care about the smell of smoke. He just looked at the cash in my hand. $60 a night, he grunted, plus 10 for the key deposit. I slid 7 $10 bills through the slot. He tossed a plastic key tag onto the metal tray. Room 104 around the back. Don't smoke in the room or we keep the deposit. I walked to room 104. The door was heavy and rusted. I pushed it open. The room smelled of mildew and cheap air freshener. The carpet was sticky. I locked the door and slid the chain into place. I checked the window. It had bars on it. Good. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress. My adrenaline was fading and the exhaustion was setting in. I took out my phone again. 10% battery. I needed to preserve it. I opened my banking app one last time, hoping for a miracle. My checking account showed a balance of 0. I scrolled down. My father had not just cut the credit card. He had transferred the balance of the joint account we opened when I was in college, the account I used for my direct deposits. He had drained it. The transaction memo read, "Repayment for tuition." I stared at the screen. I had paid off my own student loans 4 years ago. This was not about tuition. This was about control. He wanted me to crawl back to the estate. He wanted me to beg. He forgot who I was. I was not Julian. I did not beg. I calculated. I turned off my phone to save the battery. I laid down on top of the scratchy bedspread, still wearing my trench coat. I stared at the water stain on the ceiling. It looked like a map of a country that did not exist. My family thought they had stripped me of my resources. They thought they had left me vulnerable. They were wrong. They had just removed the only reason I had to be loyal to them. I closed my eyes. I did not sleep. I planned. Tomorrow, I would find a way to get back on my feet. I would get a new ID. I would get a new bank account. And I would find out why my apartment burned down. Because the more I thought about it, the less it felt like an accident. The fire alarm had not gone off until the heat blew out the windows. The sprinklers had been dry, and now my family was financially strangling me before the sun even came up. The variables did not add up, and I never left an equation unsolved. The morning sun sliced through the thin curtains of room 104 like a laser beam. I woke up fully clothed in my trench coat on top of the polyester bedspread. My neck was stiff, and my mouth tasted like ash. For a split second, I forgot where I was. I reached out for my bedside table, expecting to feel the cool marble of my nightstand. Instead, my hand hit the peeling laminate of the motel furniture. The reality crashed down on me instantly. My apartment was gone. My bank accounts were empty. My family had abandoned me. I sat up and checked my phone. 7% battery. I had turned it off to save power, but the cold room had drained it anyway. I needed a charger. I needed coffee. I needed a plan. But before I could even swing my legs off the bed, there was a heavy knock at the door. It was not the tentative tap of a maid. It was the authoritative pound of law enforcement. I knew that knock. I had heard it enough times when bailing my brother out of trouble. I stood up and smoothed down my wrinkled coat. I looked in the cracked mirror. My eyes were red, but my jaw was set. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. A man in a cheap gray suit stood there. He had the tired, aggressive look of a man who had seen too many crime scenes and drank too much stale coffee. I undid the chain and opened the door. "Detective Miller," he said, flashing a badge before I could ask. "Seattle Arson Squad, we need to talk." He did not ask if he could come in. He just stepped into the room, forcing me to back up. He looked around the dingy motel room with a sneer. "Not exactly the Four Seasons, is it, Ms. Sterling?" he asked. I did not answer. I gestured to the only chair in the room. He remained standing. "I am not here to offer condolences," he said, taking a notepad from his pocket. "We did a preliminary sweep of the building this morning. The fire marshal found traces of an accelerant in the hallway outside your unit, high-grade kerosene. This wasn't an electrical failure, Ms. Sterling. This was arson." My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained a mask of indifference. "Arson," I repeated. My voice was calm. "So someone targeted the building." Miller narrowed his eyes. He was studying me, looking for a crack, looking for the nervous twitch of a guilty conscience. "Not the building," he said. "Your unit specifically. The pour pattern started at your door and went down the hall. Whoever did this wanted to make sure you couldn't get out through the main exit. I processed this information. Arson, attempted murder. My mind raced through the list of people I had audited in the last year. Disgruntled CFOs, corrupt warehouse managers. I had enemies, sure. But none of them knew where I lived. My address was unlisted. My mail went to a P.O. box. Miller flipped a page in his notebook. "Let's talk about your insurance policy," he said. "You carry a hefty renter's policy, $500,000 for personal property. That is a lot for a studio apartment." I crossed my arms. "I am a forensic auditor detective. I own specialized equipment, servers, encrypted hard drives. My wardrobe alone is worth $50,000. I insure my assets. That is called being responsible, not being criminal." Miller hummed, skepticism vibrating in his throat. "Convenient time for a payout, though. We checked your financials, or at least what we could access. Your credit cards were flagged last night. Your primary account was drained. You are broke, Ms. Sterling. Financial distress is the #1 motive for arson. You burn the place down, collect the check, and start over." I felt a flash of cold anger. You think I burned down my own home? I asked. You think I destroyed 5 years of work for an insurance payout that won't even cover the replacement costs of my server? People do stupid things when they are desperate, he said. But here's the thing that bothers me. The entry. There was no forced entry on the main security door of the building. The electronic log shows a key fob was used at 2:15 a.m., 15 minutes before the first 911 call. He stepped closer. His smell invaded my personal space, a mix of tobacco and mints. Who has a key, Ms. Sterling? No one, I said instantly. I live alone. I don't have a boyfriend. I don't have a cleaner. I am the only one with a fob. Miller raised an eyebrow. Really? No ex-lovers with a grudge? No family members who pop in to water the plants? I laughed a dry, humorless sound. My family doesn't even know what floor I live on. They have never visited. We are not that kind of family. And I changed the locks the day I moved in. The only active fob is in my pocket. I reached into my coat and pulled out the charred piece of plastic I had salvaged. Miller stared at me for a long moment. He seemed to be weighing my words against his instincts. Finally, he sighed and reached into his jacket. He pulled out a tablet. Well, if you are telling the truth, then we have a mystery, he said, because the camera at the Starbucks across the street picked up something interesting. He tapped the screen and handed the tablet to me. I took it. My hands were steady. The video was grainy black and white footage. The timestamp read 2:14:33. The angle showed the side alley entrance of my building. A figure walked into the frame. He was wearing a dark, oversized hoodie with the hood pulled up. He moved with a strange gait, a sort of confident bounce that seemed out of place in a dark alley at 2 a.m. He stopped at the keypad. I watched closely. He didn't force the door. He didn't shimmy the lock. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a fob. He tapped it against the sensor. The light on the door turned green. The door clicked open. I felt a chill run down my spine. That was impossible. I had the only key. Wait, Miller said, pointing at the screen. Watch this part. The figure paused before entering. He seemed to be checking the street for witnesses. He turned slightly toward the camera. He reached up and pulled down his face mask. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes and a gold lighter. He lit a cigarette, cupping his hands around the flame to block the wind. The flare of the lighter illuminated his face for exactly 3 seconds. I stopped breathing. The tablet felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I knew that face. I knew the slope of the nose. I knew the weak chin that he always tried to hide with stubble. I knew the lighter. It was a vintage Cartier, a gift from my father for his 21st birthday. I knew the way he held the cigarette between his thumb and index finger, a pretentious habit he picked up during his semester abroad in Paris. It was Julian, my brother. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My brother was at my apartment building 15 minutes before the fire. My brother had a working key fob. My brother, the one who had been laughing at dinner just a week ago while asking me for a loan. Ms. Sterling Miller's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Do you recognize this man? I stared at the screen. My mind was a forensic computer processing data at light speed. Julian was a gambler. Julian was in debt. Julian was weak, but a murderer. I thought about the phone call last night. My father's coldness, not our problem. My mother's silence. The immediate freezing of my accounts. It wasn't just a punishment for being independent. It was a cleanup operation. They knew. They knew Julian had done this. Or worse, they had sent him. If I told Miller right now that it was my brother, the investigation would explode. My family would hire an army of lawyers. They would destroy the evidence. They would paint me as crazy. They would say I gave him the key. They would say we were in it together. I had no resources, no lawyer, no money. If I accused the heir to the Sterling Empire right now without undeniable proof, I would lose. I needed to be smart. I needed to be the auditor. I needed to gather the receipts before I filed the report. I looked up at Miller. I forced my face to remain blank. I forced the bile back down my throat. I don't know him, I lied. My voice did not shake. It looks like a random junkie. There are a lot of them in that neighborhood. Miller took the tablet back. He looked disappointed. He wanted an easy close. He wanted a domestic dispute. A junkie means a long investigation. Are you sure? He pressed. Look again. The lighter, the clothes. Those sneakers look expensive for a junkie. I shrugged. Drug dealers have money, Detective. I have never seen him before. Miller stared at me for another long, uncomfortable minute. Then he closed the notebook. Don't leave town, Ms. Sterling, he warned. We are going to find this guy. And if it turns out you know him, I will charge you with obstruction of justice and insurance fraud. I understand, I said, walking to the door and holding it open. Do your job, Detective. Find him. Miller walked out. I slammed the door and locked it. I slid the chain back. Then I collapsed against the wood. My legs gave out and I slid down to the filthy carpet. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a random crime. My brother walked into my building with a key he shouldn't have. He poured kerosene outside my door. He lit a match. And he walked away, leaving me to burn. Why? The question screamed in my head. Why would Julian want me dead? We weren't close, but we weren't enemies. I was just the annoying little sister who worked too hard. Then I remembered the audit, the one I mentioned to my father 2 weeks ago. I told him I was developing a new algorithm to detect shell companies used for laundering money in real estate. I told him I was going to test it on some local firms just for practice. I hadn't run the test yet, but maybe they thought I had. I pulled my knees to my chest. They didn't just want me gone, they needed me silenced. I looked at my phone, 6% battery. I didn't call the police, I didn't call a friend. I opened the browser and typed in the public records search for my brother's recent filings. If Julian wanted a war, he just started one with the only person in the family who knew how to count the bodies. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to bury them, and I would use the ashes of my own life to do it. The drive to my parents' estate in Medina took 20 minutes. I parked my rental car, a cheap compact sedan that smelled like stale cigarettes, around the corner from the main gate. I did not want them to see it. I did not want to give them another reason to look down on me. Before I stepped out of the car, I lifted my skirt and checked the device taped to my inner thigh. It was a high-fidelity digital voice recorder, the kind used by private investigators. It had a 12-hour battery life and could pick up a whisper from across the room. I pressed the record button. The tiny red light blinked once, then vanished. I was live. I walked up the long driveway. The gravel crunched under my loafers. The estate was illuminated like a fortress. Security lights bathed the manicured hedges in an artificial glow. I punched the code into the keypad at the front door. It was my birthday. My parents were sentimental about passwords, even if they were not sentimental about their children. The heavy oak door swung open. The smell hit me first. Not the smell of home, but the smell of rosemary, garlic, and expensive wine. Inside the house was warm, perfectly climate-controlled to 72 degrees. Soft jazz played from invisible speakers. It was a different universe from the motel room I had just left. It was a universe where bad things did not happen. I walked into the dining room. They were already seated. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the table carving a roast. My mother, Sylvia, was adjusting a flower arrangement, and there, sitting to her right, was Julian, my brother, the arsonist. He was laughing. He held a glass of red wine in one hand and was gesturing with the other. He looked fresh, clean. His hair was styled. He wore a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my entire insurance deductible. There was no trace of the hooded figure from the alleyway. No trace of the man who lit a match and walked away. "Ah, the prodigal daughter returns," my father said without looking up. He sliced a piece of meat with surgical precision. "We were just about to start. I assume you are here to apologize for that hysterical phone call last night." I gripped the back of a chair. My knuckles were white. "I am here because I have nowhere else to go," I said. My voice was steady. The recorder was capturing every syllable. "Sit down," my mother sighed. She waved a hand dismissively. "But please try not to touch anything. You smell like a campfire. It is quite off-putting." I sat down, directly across from Julian. He looked up at me and smiled. It was a dazzling smile, the kind that charmed investors and got him out of speeding tickets. "Hey sis," he said, raising his glass. "Rough night, huh? Heard you had a little heat wave." The audacity took my breath away. He was mocking me. He was mocking the fact that he had almost killed me. I stared at him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, but I didn't. I was an auditor. I was here to collect data. I reached for a bread roll. My hand was shaking slightly. I tried to hide it. Oh, honey. The voice came from my left. It was Tasha, Julian's wife, my sister-in-law. She was a corporate attorney with a smile like a shark. She was beautiful, elegant, and utterly ruthless. She reached out and tapped my hand with a manicured fingernail. "You have something right there," Tasha said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Under your nail. Is that soot? It looks terribly unhygienic. Perhaps you should go wash up before you handle the food. We wouldn't want to catch whatever you brought in from the streets." I looked at my hand. There was a tiny speck of black ash under my thumbnail, a remnant of my life, a remnant of the fire. Tasha wasn't worried about hygiene. She was establishing dominance. She was reminding me that I was dirty and they were clean. I pulled my hand back. "It is fine," I said coldly. "It is just carbon." So Julian said, taking a bite of roast, "What is the plan, Chloe? Insurance going to pay out, or are you going to be couch surfing for a while? Because Tasha and I are renovating the guest wing, so we can't really host you." I looked him dead in the eye. The camera footage played in my head. The lighter, the face mask. "I am curious, Julian," I said. My tone was conversational. "Where were you last night?" "Around 2 a.m. The table went quiet. Forks paused halfway to mouths. My father frowned. "What kind of question is that?" Richard asked. "I am just asking," I said, keeping my eyes on my brother. "The police asked me for my whereabouts. They asked if I knew anyone who might want to hurt me. So I am asking." "Where were you, Julian?" Julian didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He took a sip of wine. He swirled the liquid in the glass. "I was at the club," he said smoothly. "The Sapphire Lounge, playing poker with the guys until 4. Lost a few grand, but the scotch was excellent." "Why? You think I came over and roasted marshmallows on your balcony?" He laughed. My father chuckled. My mother smiled, shaking her head. "A poker game," I repeated. "That is funny, because I thought the Sapphire Lounge closed at 1 on Tuesdays." Julian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, just a tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth. But Tasha saw it. She jumped in instantly. "It was a private game," Chloe, Tasha said. Her voice was sharp. "In the VIP room. I picked him up myself at 4:30. He was so drunk he could barely walk. So unless he has a body double, he was nowhere near your tragic little apartment." She stared at me. Her eyes were hard. She was lying. I knew she was lying. She was the alibi. She was the fixer. "I see," I said. I leaned back in my chair. "So you both vouch for that?" "Under oath if necessary." My father slammed his knife down. "Enough," he barked. "This is dinner, not a deposition. Your brother was at his club. Tasha was with him. Stop trying to blame your family for your own incompetence. You probably left a candle burning or overloaded an outlet with all that computer junk you use." He pointed the knife at me. "You have always been dramatic, Chloe. Always the victim. Julian has just closed a deal to merge our logistics division with Amazon. He is a businessman. He does not have time to run around playing with matches." I looked at them. The United Front. The wall of lies. They were protecting the golden boy. They didn't care that I had lost everything. They only cared that the heir to the empire remained spotless. I touched my leg through the fabric of my skirt. I felt the recorder. I had the lie. I had Julian stating he was at the club. I had Tasha confirming it. And I had the police footage that proved they were both liars. This was good. This was admissible. But I needed more. I needed to know why. I took a sip of water. The crystal glass was cool against my lips. "Okay," I said softly. "I believe you. I am sorry. I am just stressed. The police said it was arson. They said someone used a key my mother asked, perking up. She looked at me with sudden suspicion. "Who has a key, Chloe?" "No one," I said. "Just me." "Well, there you go," Sylvia said triumphantly. "You probably lost it. Or gave it to some boyfriend you're hiding from us. You are so careless with your possessions. Remember when you lost that diamond bracelet we gave you for your 16th birthday?" "I didn't lose it, Mother," I said. "Julian stole it and pawned it to pay a bookie." "Lies," Julian shouted. He stood up, his face flushing red. "She is lying, Dad. I never took her bracelet. She is just jealous. She has always been jealous of me." "Sit down," Julian, Tasha said, pulling his arm. "Don't dignify that with a response. She is clearly delusional. Trauma does that to people." I watched Julian sit back down. He was breathing hard. He was volatile. That was good. Volatile people made mistakes. I turned to my father. "Dad," I said, "I need a loan. Just until the insurance clears. I need $5,000 for a deposit on a new place and some clothes. I can't go to work wearing this." Richard wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. He looked at me with pure disdain. "A loan," he repeated. "You are asking me for money after accusing your brother of a felony at my dinner table. I am asking for help," I said. "The answer is no," he said. He picked up his wine glass. "Consider this a lesson in humility. You wanted to be on your own. You wanted to be a big-shot forensic auditor. Figure it out. Audit your own life and find the funds." He took a sip of wine. "And by the way," he added, "don't expect us to cover your legal fees if the police decide you did this yourself. Tasha says it is a common tactic for failing professionals. Burn the assets, collect the cash. We won't let you drag the Sterling name through the mud." I felt a cold smile spreading inside my chest. It wasn't happiness. It was the satisfaction of a hunter who just watched the prey step into the trap. They thought they were cutting me off. They thought they were punishing me. But they had just given me the final piece of the puzzle. They had established motive. They had established malice. And they had done it all on tape. I stood up. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "I think I am full." "I am." "Where are you going?" my mother asked. "We haven't had dessert." "I have work to do," I said. "I have a discrepancy to resolve." I walked out of the dining room. I didn't look back. I heard Julian laugh as I left the room. "Good riddance," he said. I walked out into the cold night air. I got into my cheap rental car. I turned off the recorder. I saved the file. I named it Evidence A. I sat there for a moment looking at the house. It looked beautiful. It looked perfect. But I knew the truth. It was rotting from the inside out. And I was going to be the one to light the match that burned it all down. I started the car. I had the lie. Now I needed to find out what Julian was really doing that night, and I knew exactly where to start. If he wasn't at the poker game, he was somewhere else, and Tasha knew where, which meant Tasha was vulnerable. I put the car in gear. The audit had officially begun. The engine of the rental car idled in the empty parking lot of a 24-hour FedEx office center. I stared at the neon sign buzzing overhead. Inside, there were rows of computers available for rent by the hour. I had $40 left in my pocket. That bought me 2 hours of computer time and a lukewarm coffee. It was enough. I pulled the hood of my trench coat up and walked inside. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. I paid the drowsy teenager at the counter with crumpled bills and sat down at station number 4. The computer was slow and the keyboard was sticky, but it had an internet connection. That was all a forensic auditor needed to dismantle an empire. I cracked my knuckles and opened a private browsing window. I did not log into my own accounts. My father would be monitoring those. He would be waiting for a ping from a suspicious IP address so he could send the police my location. I was not going to give him the satisfaction. Instead, I typed in the URL for the cloud storage service my family used. We all shared a family plan. It was one of my father's cost-cutting measures disguised as family unity. I had removed my own data from it years ago, but I knew Julian still used it. Julian was lazy. He treated digital security with the same careless arrogance he treated traffic laws. He assumed nothing bad would ever happen to him because he was a Sterling. I entered his username, J_Sterling_official. It was pretentious, just like him. Then came the password field. I paused. I closed my eyes and pictured my brother. I thought about his habits, his ego. Most people use passwords that are significant to them. Birthdays, anniversaries, pet names. Julian was a narcissist, but he was also a mama's boy. He worshipped the ground Sylvia walked on because she was the one who always bailed him out. I typed in Sylvia 1965. Access denied. I tried, Mommy dearest. Access denied. Access. I thought about the date he crashed his first Porsche. Porsche 911. Access denied. I took a sip of the bitter coffee. Think Chloe. Think like a predator. What does Julian care about most right now? Money. Status. I tried the date of his upcoming promotion, CEO 2024. The screen flickered. A green checkmark appeared. Loading user dashboard. I almost laughed out loud. It was pathetic. His password was the job title he hadn't even earned yet. It was the ultimate symbol of his entitlement. He believed the position was his destiny so firmly that he used it to lock up his secrets. The dashboard opened. It was a mess of folders, vacation photos, wedding receipts, golf swing analysis. I ignored the personal clutter. I went straight to the trash bin. People always delete the smoking gun, but they rarely empty the trash. The bin was empty. He had scrubbed it. That was interesting. Julian never cleaned anything. Someone had told him to wipe his tracks. Tasha. I went back to the main directory. I sorted files by date modified. I wanted to see what he had been working on in the last 48 hours. There was a folder named Project Phoenix. It had been modified 3 hours ago, right before the dinner party. I double-clicked it. The folder was password protected, of course. I leaned back in the cheap office chair. A second layer of security. This wasn't Julian. This was Tasha. She was the lawyer. She knew about attorney-client privilege and encrypted files. She would use something harder to guess. But Tasha was also practical. She wouldn't use a password Julian couldn't remember. It had to be something they both knew, something that bound them together. I tried their wedding date. Failed. I tried the name of their dog. Failed. Then I remembered the dinner conversation. My father had mentioned a merger, a deal with Amazon. Julian had bragged about it. Project Phoenix. Phoenix rising from the ashes. It was a metaphor for the company. I typed in the ticker symbol of the family company, followed by the target stock price my father had been obsessed with for months. SEH_450. The folder opened. My heart rate didn't jump. It slowed down. This was the moment the numbers started talking. And I was the only one listening. There were 3 PDF files inside. I opened the first one. Loan_agreement_Vargas.pdf. It wasn't a bank loan. The interest rate was 40% monthly. The lender was an LLC registered in the Cayman Islands, but the contact email was a known alias for the Seattle syndicate. I scrolled to the bottom. The principal amount was $2.3 million. The due date was yesterday. There was a scanned image of a handwritten note attached to the PDF. It was short and brutal. Mr. Sterling, your extension has expired. We are not a charity. Payment in full by Friday or we take physical collateral. Physical collateral. That explained the desperation. That explained the sweat on Julian's forehead that he tried to hide with expensive foundation. He wasn't just in debt. He was a dead man walking. $2 million was not a sum my father could just write a check for anymore. I knew the company's financials better than anyone. Sterling Estate Holdings was liquidity poor. They had assets, but they were tied up in properties that weren't selling. So Julian needed $2 million in cash, immediately. I opened the second file. Sterling_balance_sheet_Q3.pdf. I scanned the columns. Revenue was down 40%. Operating costs were up. The company was bleeding. They were 3 months away from insolvency. My father's boast about the Amazon merger was a lie. No one merges with a sinking ship. They were trying to dress up the corpse to sell it before anyone noticed it was dead. Then I opened the third file. Life_insurance_policy_CS_77894. The file name made my blood turn to ice. CS, Chloe Sterling. I clicked it. The document loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, revealing my own execution order. It was a term life insurance policy issued by a boutique insurer that specialized in high-risk corporate policies. The policyholder was Sterling Estate Holdings. The insured life was Chloe Sterling. I scrolled to the payout section. Death benefit $5 million. I scrolled further. My eyes scanned the fine print. the clauses, the exclusions. Clause 4B, accidental death rider. If the insured's death is the result of a documented accident including, but not limited to vehicular collision, industrial accident, or residential fire, the benefit is doubled to $10 million. Residential fire. The words seemed to float off the screen. I looked at the date at the bottom of the page. The policy had been purchased 5 years ago when I first started consulting for the firm. It is standard practice for companies to insure key executives. Key man insurance. It makes sense. But then I saw the modification log. Policy status updated. Date of update 7 days ago. Action premium payment expedited. Clause 4B activated. Beneficiary account routing number updated to... I checked the routing number. It wasn't the company's main operating account. It was an offshore holding account. The same account used to pay the initial interest on Julian's loan to Vargas. I sat back. The air in the FedEx office felt suddenly thin. It was a perfect circle of accounting. The company is failing. Julian owes the mob $2 million. The company needs cash to survive the quarter. They couldn't sell property fast enough. They couldn't get a bank loan because their credit was shot. So they looked at the balance sheet and they found an underutilized asset. Me. I was the asset. My life was the liquidity event they needed. If I died in a tragic residential fire caused by my own negligence, the insurance company would pay out $10 million. $2 million goes to Vargas to save Julian's kneecaps. $8 million goes into the company to prop up the financials long enough to trick Amazon into buying them. I wasn't a daughter to them. I wasn't a sister. I was a walking check. I was a line item that was worth more deleted than active. My father's voice echoed in my head. Not our problem. Of course it wasn't their problem, it was their solution. I looked at the timestamp on the policy update again. 7 days ago. 7 days ago was my mother's birthday. I had sent her flowers. I had called her. She had sounded sweet. She had asked me how I was doing. She asked if I was still living in that fire trap apartment. She wasn't making conversation. She was verifying the location of the asset. I felt a wave of nausea. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to curl up on the dirty floor and scream, but I didn't. I forced the feeling down. I locked it away in a box in my mind labeled irrelevant emotions. I was an auditor. Emotions are bias. Bias ruins the data. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a USB drive I had bought at the counter. I plugged it in. I downloaded every file: the loan shark agreement, the balance sheets, the insurance policy, the modification logs. I had the motive. Julian wasn't just a pyromaniac. He was a hitman working on commission for the family business. And my parents were the board of directors who authorized the strike. I ejected the USB drive. I cleared the browser history. I wiped the cache. I stood up and walked out of the store. The night air was cold, but I didn't feel it. I felt hot. I felt the phantom heat of the fire on my skin. They thought I was dead, or at least defeated. They thought I was a scared little girl who would take a bus out of town and disappear. They forgot what I did for a living. I find the rot. I expose the fraud. I don't just find the missing money. I find the people who stole it. I got back into my rental car. I put the key in the ignition, but I didn't turn it. I looked at the USB drive in my hand. This was enough to send them all to prison for life. Conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, racketeering. But prison was too easy. Prison was clean. They had tried to burn me. They had tried to erase me. I wasn't going to just hand this to the police. Not yet. I wanted them to feel it. I wanted them to watch their empire crumble brick by brick. I wanted them to know it was me. I put the car in gear. I knew where I had to go next. I needed to secure my position. I was a target, a $10 million target. As long as that policy was active, I wasn't safe anywhere. But I couldn't cancel it. If I canceled it, they would know I knew. I needed to use it against them. My phone buzzed. 1% battery. A text message. From Tasha. We are worried about you. Julian feels bad about dinner. Meet me at the boathouse tomorrow at 9 a.m. I have a check for you. Come alone. I stared at the screen. A check. Or another match. I plugged the phone into the car charger. I'll be there, I typed back. I wasn't going for the check. I was going because Tasha was the weak link. She was the one who password protected the folder. She was the one who cleaned up the mess. She was the smart one, which meant she was the one who could be bargained with, or destroyed first. I drove out of the parking lot. The city of Seattle slept around me, but the Sterlings were awake, and so was I. The morning fog rolled off Lake Washington, creating a wall of gray around the Sterling family boathouse. I parked my rental car next to a pristine white Range Rover. The license plate read TASHA_LAW. Of course it did. My sister-in-law did not believe in subtlety. She believed in branding. I stepped out of the car. The damp air cut through my trench coat. I was still wearing the same clothes I had escaped the fire in. I felt gritty and tired, but my mind was sharp. I touched the recorder taped to my leg. It was running. Tasha was standing at the end of the dock looking out at the water. She wore a camel hair coat that cost more than my first car and leather gloves that looked like they had never touched a door handle. She didn't turn around as I approached. She knew I was there. She had calculated my arrival time down to the minute. "You are late, Chloe," she said to the open water. Her voice was calm, professional. It was the voice she used when she was negotiating a settlement for a client who was guilty but rich. "I am not late, Tasha," I said, stopping 10 feet away from her. "I am cautious. I wanted to make sure you didn't bring Julian. Or a match." Tasha turned around slowly. Her face was perfectly made up. Not a hair was out of place. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Julian is at home sedated," she said. "He was a mess last night. He tends to panic when things don't go exactly according to plan. Unlike you, you always were the cold one." I didn't blink. "I am not cold, Tasha. I am efficient. There is a difference." Tasha sighed and walked toward me. The heels of her boots clicked on the wooden dock. She stopped just outside of arm's reach. "Let's skip the pleasantries," she said. "We both know why we are here. You know what Julian did. You have the receipts. You probably hacked his cloud or tracked his phone. I warned him about using his birth date as a password, but men never listen." She reached into her designer bag. My muscles tensed. I was ready to run. But she didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a white envelope. "This is a cashier's check," she said, holding it out. $50,000. It is drawn from a shell account that cannot be traced back to the family. It is tax-free. It is enough to go to Chicago or New York or anywhere that isn't Seattle. I looked at the envelope. $50,000. That was the price of my life. That was the severance package for being a Sterling. "You want me to leave," I stated. "I want you to be smart," Tasha corrected. "Listen to me, Chloe. I am speaking to you as a lawyer now, not as your sister-in-law. If you go to the police with whatever evidence you think you have, you will lose." I laughed. It was a sharp, bitter sound. "I have video footage, Tasha. I have the insurance policy. I have the motive. How exactly do I lose?" Tasha smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Because I will destroy you," she said softly. "If you file a report, I will counter-sue for defamation. I will paint you as a mentally unstable woman who is obsessed with sabotaging her successful brother. I will subpoena your medical records from college. Remember when you saw that therapist for anxiety during your sophomore year? I will put that on the record. I will make the jury believe you set the fire yourself to get attention from Daddy." She took a step closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I will drag this out for 5 years, Chloe. You don't have the money for a legal battle. We do. We will bury you in paperwork. We will freeze your assets. We will make you unhireable in this town. By the time we are done, you won't be the victim. You will be the crazy daughter who tried to frame her family for money. Is that what you want?" I stared at her. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the fog. She meant it. She had the power and the lack of conscience to do exactly what she said. She would gaslight the entire legal system to protect the family fortune because her future depended on it too. But she made a mistake. She assumed I was emotional. She assumed I cared about my reputation. I looked at the envelope again. I reached out and took it. Tasha's shoulders relaxed slightly. She thought she had won. She thought everyone had a price. $50,000, I said, weighing the envelope in my hand. That is a lot of money. It is a fresh start, Tasha said. Take it. Go to the airport. Don't look back. It is better this way. Julian won't bother you if you are gone. And Richard and Sylvia just want this to go away. I opened the envelope. I pulled out the check. I looked at the routing number. I memorized it instantly. It matched the offshore account that paid the insurance premium. Thank you, Tasha, I said. I looked up at her and smiled. But I think you misunderstood something. Her eyes narrowed. What? I am not taking this because I am leaving, I said. I am taking this because it is payment. Payment for what she asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. Consulting fees, I said. You just paid me $50,000 to audit your bribery attempt. Tasha's face hardened. Give me the check back, Chloe. If you aren't leaving, the deal is off. I took a step back. Oh no, Tasha. The transaction is complete. You handed it to me. Possession is 9/10 of the law, right? Isn't that what they taught you in law school? You little witch, Tasha hissed. She stepped forward, reaching for my wrist. I held up my phone. I have been streaming this entire conversation to a private server. I lied. Touch me, and the assault charge gets added to the racketeering file. Tasha froze. Her hand hovered in the air. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes. She realized she wasn't dealing with the little sister anymore. She was dealing with a professional. You will regret this, she said, low and dangerous. You have no idea who you are messing with. Julian owes money to people who don't file lawsuits. They break legs. If you destroy the family, you destroy his ability to pay them. And when they come for him, they might just come for you too. I put the check in my pocket. Let them come, I said. I am already dead, remember? The insurance policy says so. I turned around and walked back to my rental car. My heart was pounding, but my steps were steady. I heard Tasha shouting something behind me, but the wind carried it away. I got into the car and locked the door. I looked at the check again. Pay to the order of Chloe Sterling. Amount $50,000. Memo settlement. She had written settlement on the memo line. She thought it was a legal safeguard. A way to claim I accepted money to resolve a dispute. But in the world of forensic accounting, a settlement paid from an offshore account to a witness in a criminal investigation isn't a settlement. It is a confession. I started the engine. I had the video of Julian, I had the insurance documents, and now I had a physical paper trail linking the family lawyer to the cover-up. I wasn't going to the airport. I was going to the bank. Not to cash the check for spending money, but to deposit it into an escrow account monitored by the FBI. I pulled out of the parking lot. Tasha was still standing on the dock, furiously typing on her phone. She was probably calling Julian, or Richard, or the hitman. It didn't matter. The clock was ticking. And I had just secured the funding for my war. I drove toward downtown Seattle. The sun was trying to break through the fog. I felt a strange sense of clarity. My family had tried to buy me off with pocket change. They valued my silence at $50,000. I was going to cost them $500 million. I dialed a number on my burner phone. It was a number I hadn't used in years. A contact from my old life, a journalist who hated the Sterlings as much as I did. Hello, I said when he answered. This is Chloe. I have a story for you. And I brought receipts. The game had changed. It was no longer about survival. It was about annihilation, and I was just getting started. The upload progress bar crawled across the screen of my laptop. 98%, 99%. I held my breath, not out of fear, but out of focus. The sound of heavy boots thumping up the motel stairs was getting louder. I did not look at the door. I looked at the screen. The green checkmark finally appeared. Upload complete. I pulled the USB drive out and dropped it into my coffee cup. The dark liquid swallowed the device instantly. I closed the laptop. I sat back in the chair and folded my hands on the table. 3 seconds later, the door frame splintered. Police, search warrant, hands where I can see them. 2 uniformed officers burst into the room with guns drawn. They were not detectives like Miller. These were patrol officers sent to execute a raid. They expected a struggle. They expected a desperate woman on the run. Instead, they found me sitting calmly next to a cold cup of coffee, wearing a trench coat and a look of absolute boredom. I am not armed, I said, keeping my hands visible. The warrant is on the table, I assume. One officer grabbed my wrist and twisted it behind my back. He cuffed me tighter than necessary. The metal bit into my skin. He recited my rights in a monotone voice. I didn't listen to the rights. I listened to the charge. Chloe Sterling, you are under arrest for grand larceny, corporate espionage, and violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. I almost smiled. Grand larceny. They were not accusing me of arson anymore. They had pivoted. My father had realized that the fire investigation would take too long. He needed me stopped now. He needed my credibility destroyed immediately. By accusing me of stealing company data, he turned me from a victim into a thief. It was a smart move. It was a move Tasha would have drafted. They dragged me out of the room. I saw the motel manager peering through his blinds. I did not hide my face. I walked with my head up. As they shoved me into the back of the cruiser, I saw a black sedan parked across the street. The window was tinted, but I knew who was inside. My father did not trust the police to handle things without supervision. He wanted to make sure the package was delivered. The ride to the precinct was silent. I used the time to calculate. They were charging me with stealing the documents I had downloaded. By doing that, they were admitting the documents were real. They were claiming ownership of the evidence. That was their mistake. They were so desperate to silence me that they had just authenticated the smoking gun. They processed me quickly. Fingerprints, mugshot. They took my phone. They took my shoelaces. They put me in a holding cell that smelled of bleach and despair. I sat on the metal bench. I did not pace. I closed my eyes and reviewed the statutes for whistleblowing. I built my defense in my mind while the other women in the cell argued over a cigarette. 4 hours later, they moved me to an interrogation room. It was not Detective Miller waiting for me. It was a man I had never seen before. He was young, and he looked exhausted. He wore a suit that was 2 sizes too big. He had a stack of files in front of him and sweat on his upper lip. "Miss Sterling," he said, "I am Gary. I am your public defender. I looked at him. My parents had frozen my assets, so I could not hire a real lawyer. They wanted me to be represented by an overworked court-appointed attorney who would push me to take a plea deal. They wanted me to feel helpless. "Hello, Gary," I said. "You look tired." "I am tired," he said, opening a file. "And you are in a lot of trouble. The district attorney is pushing for maximum bail. Flight risk. The charges are serious. Your former employer, Sterling Estate Holdings, claims you stole over 4 terabytes of proprietary data, including trade secrets regarding a merger with Amazon. They have logs of your IP address accessing their secure servers last night." He looked at me expecting me to cry or deny it. "I did access the servers," I said. My voice was level. I used a valid password. Gary sighed. He rubbed his temples. "That is not the point, Miss Sterling. They say you had no authorization. They say you were terminated from your consulting role 2 days prior. They have a termination letter signed and dated." I nodded. "Of course they did. They backdated it." "That is fraud number 1, I said. "Write that down, Gary." Gary blinked. "Listen to me. The evidence is overwhelming. They found the laptop in your room. Forensics is cracking it right now. If they find those files, you are looking at 10 years in federal prison. My advice is to cooperate. If you return the data and sign a non-disclosure agreement, your father, the victim, has indicated they might drop the charges to a misdemeanor." I leaned forward. The metal chair scraped against the floor. The sound was sharp. "Gary," I said, "look at me." He looked up. He saw that I was not a scared girl. He saw the auditor. "You are being played," I said. "This is not a theft case. This is a containment strategy." "I don't understand," he stammered. I pointed to the file. "They are accusing me of stealing 4 terabytes of data, specifically financial records and the Amazon merger details, correct?" "Yes," he said. "And by accusing me of stealing them, they are claiming those files are their property, that the information inside them is accurate and belongs to them." Gary frowned. "Technically, yes." "Good," I said, "because inside those files are 2 very interesting documents. One is a loan agreement with a known organized crime syndicate for $2 million signed by my brother. The other is a life insurance policy taken out on me for $10 million with a payout clause for accidental fire." Gary stopped writing. His mouth opened slightly. "If I stole their property," I continued, "then that insurance policy is their property, which means they have officially claimed ownership of a document that gives them a financial motive to murder me." I watched the gears turn in his head. He was young, but he wasn't stupid. He realized suddenly that this wasn't a corporate espionage case. It was a murder investigation disguised as a property dispute. That would be highly irregular, he whispered. It is not irregular, Gary. It is leverage. I sat back. Here is what is going to happen. You are not going to ask for a plea deal. You are going to go to the judge and you are going to request a bail hearing. You are going to tell the DA that if they proceed with these charges, they will be entering the contents of the stolen files into the public record. But the non-disclosure agreement, he said, they want you to sign it to seal the files. I laughed. I will not sign anything. And tell them this. Tell them the laptop they seized is useless. It has a military-grade encryption that wipes the hard drive if the wrong password is entered 3 times. The police forensics team has probably already triggered it. The data is gone from that machine. Gary looked panicked. Then you have no evidence. If the laptop is wiped, you have nothing to leverage. I smiled. It was the first time I smiled all day. Gary, I am a professional. Do you really think I kept the only copy on a laptop in a motel room? I leaned in closer. My voice dropped to a whisper. The data is on a cloud server in Zurich. It is set to a dead man's switch. If I do not log in every 24 hours to reset the timer, the system automatically emails the entire 4 terabytes to the SEC, the FBI, and the editorial board of the New York Times. I checked the clock on the wall. I have about 6 hours left, Gary, so I suggest you go tell the DA that unless I walk out of here on my own recognizance before dinner time, the Sterling Empire is going to collapse on the morning news. Gary stared at me. He looked terrified. He looked at the woman in the trench coat who had just turned a prison sentence into a hostage situation. You really did that?" he asked. I adjusted my cuffs. "I don't bluff, Gary. I audit. Now go do your job." He stood up. He gathered his files. His hands were shaking. He ran out of the room. I sat alone in the interrogation room. I looked at the two-way mirror. I knew they were watching. I knew my father was probably in the observation room right now, standing next to the chief of police. I imagined the look on his face. He thought he could use the law to crush me. He forgot that the law is just a system of rules, and I knew the rules better than he did. He had tried to bury me under a mountain of false accusations, but he didn't realize that by digging that hole, he was just digging his own grave. I waited. 1 hour passed, then 2. I did not ask for water. I did not ask for the bathroom. I sat perfectly still, practicing the stoicism that drove my mother crazy. At hour 3, the door opened. It wasn't Gary. It was Tasha. She was not wearing her lawyer face. She looked pale. She walked in and signaled for the guard to leave us alone. She sat down opposite me. She didn't have a briefcase. She just had her phone. "You are insane," she hissed. "You set up a dead man's switch. Do you know what happens if that data leaks? Vargas will kill Julian. The stock will go to zero. The family will be ruined." I shrugged. "Then you better hurry up and get me released, Tasha." Tick-tock. "We can't just release you," she said. "The charges are filed. It is in the system." "Figure it out," I said. "You are the brilliant attorney. Call the DA. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. Tell him I had authorization. Tell him whatever lie you need to tell to get those handcuffs off me." Tasha grit her teeth. "Richard is furious. He wants to leave you in here and take the risk. He thinks you are bluffing about the Zurich server." I looked her in the eye. "Call his bluff then. Go home, Tasha. Turn on the TV tomorrow morning. And when the FBI raids the mansion, try to remember that you had a chance to stop it." Tasha stared at me for a long moment. She was searching for the weakness. She was looking for the little sister she could bully. She didn't find her. "Fine," she spat. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "It is me," she said into the phone. "Drop the charges." "Yes, all of them. Cite a clerical error regarding her employment status. Say she was still authorized to access the system. Just do it. I don't care what Richard says. Do you want to be indicted for conspiracy, or do you want to keep your job?" "Good." She hung up. She looked at me with pure hatred. "You win this round, Chloe. But you can't hide forever. Eventually, you will miss that 24-hour window. Eventually, you will slip up." I stood up as the guard came back in with the keys to my cuffs. "I won't slip up, Tasha," I said, rubbing my wrists, "because I am not just holding the data. I am analyzing it. And I found something else in those files. Something about you." Tasha froze. "What?" I leaned close to her ear. "I know about the account in the Cayman Islands, Tasha, the one that isn't shared with Julian, the one you have been funneling money into for 3 years. You aren't just protecting the family, you are embezzling from them." Tasha turned white. She stopped breathing. "Get me out of here," I whispered, "and maybe I will forget I saw it." She didn't say a word. She turned on her heel and walked out. 10 minutes later, I was standing on the sidewalk outside the precinct. It was raining. I had no shoelaces, and my phone was dead. But I was free. I took a deep breath of the cold air. The first battle was over. But the war had just begun. My parents had tried to use the police to silence me. Instead, they had just given me a front row seat to their desperation. I started walking. I needed to find a computer. I needed to reset the timer on the server. And then I needed to find out who really started that fire. Because while my family was busy trying to frame me for theft, they had forgotten one thing. The arsonist was still out there. And he had unfinished business. I sat in the back corner of a 24-hour diner called the Rusty Spoon. My laptop was open, and I was nursing a cup of black coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. On the wall above the counter, a flat-screen television was tuned to the local morning news. I usually ignored the news. It was mostly noise and traffic reports. But today, I couldn't ignore it, because my mother's face was filling the entire screen. The headline at the bottom read, "The Sterling Family Tragedy, A Mother's Plea." Sylvia was sitting on a beige couch in the television studio. She was wearing a soft pastel cardigan and pearl earrings. It was her innocent look. The look she wore when she fired the housekeepers for stealing silverware that she had actually misplaced herself. She held a tissue in her manicured hand, dabbing at the corner of her eye. She wasn't crying. I knew that because Sylvia Sterling didn't have tear ducts, she only had ambition. But to the audience, she looked like a saint who had been pushed to the breaking point. The host leaned in with a sympathetic frown. "Mrs. Sterling, this must be incredibly difficult for you. Your daughter has been missing for 48 hours, and there are rumors of police involvement. What can you tell us?" Sylvia let out a shaky breath. "It was a perfect performance. We are just heartbroken," she said. Her voice trembled just enough to sound authentic. "Chloe has struggled for years. We tried to keep it private out of respect for her dignity, but since college she has battled with severe depression and substance abuse issues. We have paid for rehab. We have paid for therapy. But she has these episodes, paranoia, delusions of persecution. She thinks everyone is out to get her, even the people who love her the most." I stared at the screen. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I had never touched a drug in my life. I graduated summa cum laude. I ran marathons. The only thing I was addicted to was accuracy. But watching her speak, I realized how easy it was to rewrite history when you had a microphone and $1 million. The host nodded gravely. "And the fire at her apartment. Do you think that was related to her condition?" Sylvia looked down at her hands. "We believe so. She called us that night screaming incoherently. She was hallucinating. We think she might have set the fire in a moment of crisis, a cry for help. And now she has run away because she is afraid of the consequences. We just want her to come home. Chloe, if you are watching this, please, we have a bed waiting for you at the clinic. We just want you to get well." The camera zoomed in on her face. A single tear finally rolled down her cheek. It was an Academy Award-winning moment. The diner went quiet. The waitress shook her head as she poured coffee for a trucker. "Poor woman," she muttered. "Kids these days just burn their lives down and blame their parents. I hope they find that girl before she hurts someone else." I felt the eyes of the room sliding over me. They didn't recognize me. I was wearing a hoodie and I looked like a wreck. But I felt the weight of their judgment. My mother had just branded me. She had turned me into a mentally unstable addict on live television. She had inoculated the public against my story. If I went to the press now with my evidence, they would just say it was the ramblings of a sick woman. It was brilliant, it was evil, and it was working. My phone buzzed on the table. It wasn't a text, it was an email notification. Then another, then a third. I opened my inbox. From HR Department Harrison and Associates. Subject: immediate termination of contract. I clicked the email. It was short. Dear Ms. Sterling, in light of recent public allegations and the reputational risk to our firm, we are terminating your consulting agreement effective immediately. Please return all company badges and devices. Your access to the server has been revoked. We wish you the best in your recovery. Recovery. They bought it. My boss, a man who had praised my ethical standards last week, fired me via email because my mother cried on a talk show. I didn't reply. There was no point. I was radioactive. My father had made the calls. He had threatened to pull the Sterling accounts from the firm if they didn't cut me loose. He was stripping me bare. First my home, then my money, now my career. He wanted me to have nothing left, so I would have no choice but to crawl back to the asylum they had prepared for me. I closed the laptop. I took a sip of the terrible coffee. Most people would have broken down right then. Most people would have called the hotline number flashing on the TV screen. But I wasn't most people. I was a forensic auditor. And when an auditor sees a discrepancy, they don't cry. They dig. They had taken my job, which meant I had a lot of free time. And they had taken my reputation, which meant I had nothing left to lose. I looked at the screen again. Sylvia was still talking about my childhood imaginary friends. They were so confident. They thought they had checkmated me. But they forgot one thing. To catch a thief, you need a thief. But to catch a white-collar criminal, you need someone who knows how to read the books they think they hid. I cracked my knuckles. I opened a new browser window. I wasn't going to audit a client today. I was going to audit the Sterling Empire. I had the data I downloaded from Julian's cloud. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. I needed the raw data. I needed the historical records. I logged into the municipal permit database. I pulled the property records for every building my father owned. I logged into the state tax portal using an old developer key I had kept from a previous job. I started building a map. Not a map of land, but a map of money. I worked for 6 hours straight. The waitress refilled my coffee 4 times. I didn't eat. I just typed. I built a spreadsheet that linked every LLC to every bank account. I traced the flow of cash from the rental properties to the holding companies, and then I saw it. It was a small anomaly, a rounding error in the grand scheme of a billion-dollar company. But in forensic accounting, there is no such thing as a small error. There is only a thread that leads to a sweater. There was a recurring payment of $10,000 a month labeled Storage and Archival Services. It was paid to a company called Ironclad Logistics. I ran a background check on Ironclad. It didn't have a website. It didn't have a phone number. The registered address was a P.O. box in a strip mall in Tacoma. But the owner of record was a man named Marcus V. Marcus V, the same Marcus V who was the lieutenant for the Vargas crime family, the loan shark Julian owed money to. Why was my father's legitimate real estate company paying storage fees to the mob? I dug deeper. I looked at the dates of the payments. They started 3 years ago, right around the time the IRS announced an audit of the construction industry in Seattle. I closed my eyes and let my mind work. Storage. Archival. They weren't paying for storage space. They were hiding something. Physical records. You can wipe a server, you can burn a hard drive, but in the construction business, you need physical receipts, concrete invoices, labor logs, bribes paid in cash to inspectors. You can't digitize those without leaving a trail, so you keep them in a book, a black ledger. If the IRS found those books, my father would go to prison for 20 years, so he hid them. He paid Marcus V to keep them safe. But then I saw the last payment. The payments to Ironclad stopped 2 weeks ago. Why would they stop paying the mob to hide their dirty laundry? Unless they moved the laundry. I looked at the date. 2 weeks ago. That was the day Julian came to my apartment unannounced. I remembered it clearly now. It was a Tuesday. I was working late. The buzzer rang. It was Julian. He looked frantic. He was sweating. He was carrying a cardboard box, a heavy banker's box taped shut with duct tape. He told me he needed a favor. He said Tasha was going through a divorce phase and trying to subpoena his assets. He said the box contained his old baseball card collection and he didn't want her to get it. He asked if he could leave it in my closet, just for a few days. I was tired. I didn't care about his baseball cards. I told him to put it in the back of the guest closet and leave. He did. He looked relieved. He practically ran out of the apartment. I stared at the blinking cursor on my screen. It wasn't baseball cards. It was the ledgers. They had stopped paying Marcus V because they had a falling out. Maybe the mob raised the price. Maybe my father got paranoid. So they needed a new hiding place, a place no one would look, a place belonging to the estranged daughter who never had visitors. My apartment wasn't just a target for insurance money. My apartment was the storage facility. And then the fire happened. I replayed the timeline. Julian drops off the box. 2 weeks later, the company is failing. They need the insurance money, but they also need to get rid of the evidence. If they just fired the apartment for the insurance, the fire marshals might find the fireproof box in the closet. They might open it. They might see the ledgers. So they needed a fire that was hot enough to destroy everything. Or they needed a fire that was targeted specifically at that closet. I pulled up the fire marshal's report from the hack I did earlier. Point of origin bedroom closet. Accelerant detected. High-grade kerosene poured directly onto contents. I felt a chill that went down to my bones. They didn't just want me dead. That was a bonus. They burned my apartment to destroy the evidence of 3 years of tax evasion and bribery. Julian didn't just light a match. He walked into my bedroom. He opened the closet. He poured fuel on the box he had planted there himself, and then he lit it. I was living with the evidence that could destroy them for 2 weeks, and I didn't even know it. If I had opened that box, I would have owned them. And now it was ash. They had destroyed the proof. They had won. I slammed my fist on the table. The coffee cup rattled. No, they hadn't won. Because in accounting, every debit has a credit. If the physical books were gone, there had to be a shadow. Marcus V., the mobster. He kept the books for 3 years. He was a professional blackmailer. You don't hold leverage for 3 years without making a copy. I looked at the payment history again. The final payment to Ironclad had a memo line. Termination fee. Inventory returned. Inventory returned. Julian picked up the box from Marcus. He brought it to me. Then he burned it. But Marcus. I typed his name into the police database. Marcus Vargas. Currently under indictment for racketeering. Out on bail. I sat back. My parents had just framed me for being crazy. They had fired me. They had burned my home. But they made a fatal error. They assumed that burning the original ledgers meant the information was gone. They forgot that they had rented space from a criminal who specialized in insurance. Marcus V had a copy. I was sure of it. And Marcus V was currently facing federal charges. He needed a deal, or he needed money. I looked at my bank account. The $50,000 Tasha gave me. It wasn't enough to buy a condo, but it was enough to buy a conversation with a loan shark who hated the Sterlings for cutting off his easy money. I closed my laptop. My mother was still on the TV screen, wiping away invisible tears. Cry all you want, Sylvia, I thought. Save those tears. You are going to need them when the FBI asks you why your husband was paying the Seattle mob to babysit his tax returns. I stood up. I left a $5 tip on the table. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the crazy daughter. I was the auditor who just found the missing link. I walked out of the diner. The rain had stopped. I knew where I had to go. I was going to pay a visit to the underbelly of Seattle. My father played with the mob. Now I was going to make them play for me. I waited for Tasha in the P4 level of her law firm's underground parking garage. It was the kind of place where the silence was heavy and the air smelled of exhaust and expensive car wax. I leaned against a concrete pillar in the shadows. I checked my watch. It was 7:15 p.m. Tasha was predictable. She billed by the hour, but she left the office exactly 15 minutes after the senior partners did to show dedication without actually doing extra work. I heard the click of her heels before I saw her. She was walking fast, holding her phone to her ear. She looked stressed. Her perfect posture was gone, replaced by the hunched shoulders of someone carrying a heavy secret. She unlocked her Range Rover, the lights flashing in the dim garage. As she reached for the handle, I stepped out of the shadows. "Hello, Tasha." She screamed and dropped her keys. She spun around her hand, going to her chest. When she saw it was me, the fear turned instantly to anger. "Are you insane?" she hissed, looking around to see if anyone was watching. "You are supposed to be in hiding, or in jail. If security sees you, they will call the police." I bent down and picked up her keys. I held them out, but I didn't let go when she reached for them. "We need to talk," I said, "and not about settlement checks." "I have nothing to say to you," she snapped, snatching the keys back. "You refused the money. You declared war. Now deal with the consequences. Julian is already meeting with the crisis management team. They are going to destroy you, Chloe." I laughed softly. The sound echoed off the concrete walls. "Julian couldn't manage a crisis if it came with instructions," I said. "But you, Tasha, you are smart. You are the legal brain of the family, which is why I am confused. Confused about what she asked unlocking her car door. Confused about why a smart lawyer would sign her name to a death warrant." Tasha froze. Her hand hovered over the door handle. She turned back to me slowly. Her eyes were wary. "What are you talking about?" I took a step closer. I lowered my voice. "I audited the shell companies, Tasha. Not just the financials. I audited the incorporation documents, the articles of organization for Blue Heron LLC, the filing papers for Obsidian Holdings, and the registered agent for the company that paid for the kerosene." I watched her throat move as she swallowed. "Julian told me those were his companies," I continued. "He told me he was the owner. But Julian is lazy. He didn't want his name on the public record because he has a gambling record, so he needed a nominee, a face, a signature." I leaned in close enough to smell her expensive perfume. "It is your name on the filings, Tasha. You are the managing member. You are the signatory authority. Do you know what that means in a RICO case?" Tasha stared at me. She wasn't moving. "It means that when the FBI unwinds this, it doesn't matter who the beneficiary is." I said, my voice cold and hard. "It matters who signed the checks. Under the law, Julian is just a passive investor. You are the operator. You are the one who authorized the payments to the mob. You are the one who laundered the money." I saw the realization hit her. Her eyes widened. The arrogance drained out of her face, leaving her looking young and terrified. "No," she whispered. "Julian said. Richard said they would protect me. They said it was just a formality." I shook my head. "They played you, Tasha. They set you up. Why do you think Richard didn't sign it? Why do you think Sylvia kept her name off everything? They needed a fall guy, and who better than the daughter-in-law? If things go wrong, they cut you loose. They say you went rogue. They say you used your legal knowledge to manipulate poor innocent Julian." I pulled out a folded piece of paper from my pocket. It was a printout of the federal sentencing guidelines. "Conspiracy to commit arson resulting in endangerment of life," I read. "Money laundering over $1 million. Racketeering. You are looking at 25 years, Tasha. Minimum. You will be 55 when you get out. And Julian, he will have divorced you 24 years ago and married a 20-year-old model." "Stop it," she said. Her voice cracked. She leaned against the car for support. "They wouldn't do that. We are family." "Family," I repeated, "like they are family to me. Look at what they did to me, Tasha. They burned my house down. They tried to kill me for an insurance payout. If they are willing to kill their own blood for money, what do you think they will do to you? You are just an employee with a wedding ring." Tasha closed her eyes. A tear leaked out, ruining her perfect makeup. She slid down the side of the car until she was crouching on the dirty concrete floor. She knew I was right. She was a lawyer. She knew the law better than anyone. She had been so blinded by the proximity to wealth and power that she hadn't looked at the paperwork she was signing. I crouched down next to her. I wasn't there to comfort her. I was there to close the deal. "You have a choice, Tasha," I said. "You can go down with the ship. You can be the loyal wife who goes to federal prison while her husband plays golf. Or you can get out." She looked at me. Her eyes were red. "How?" "Immunity," I said. "You turn state's witness. You give me the evidence that links Richard and Julian directly to the order. You prove that you were acting under duress. You proved that they were the masterminds. Tasha shook her head. They don't write things down, Chloe. You know that. Richard never sends emails about the dirty stuff. It is all verbal, behind closed doors. I don't need an email, I said. I need a recording. Tasha looked away. She bit her lip. She was hiding something. You have it, don't you? I whispered. You are a paranoid lawyer, Tasha. You record everything. You record your client meetings. You record your settlement talks. She didn't answer. Tasha, look at me. If you don't give it to me, I am going to the FBI with the incorporation papers tomorrow. I will hand them your head on a platter to save myself. I will tell them you were the mastermind. She flinched. She looked at her purse. Then she looked at me. If I give it to you, she said, her voice trembling, you have to promise to keep my name out of the press until the deal is signed. I need time to move my assets. I need time to get safe. I nodded. Deal. I don't want you. I want Richard. Tasha reached into her purse. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the zipper. She pulled out a small silver USB drive attached to her keychain. She detached it. She held it in her palm for a second, staring at it like it was a grenade. This was taken 3 weeks ago, she whispered. In the library. Richard, Julian, and me, they thought I was just taking notes. I had my phone recording under the legal pad. What is on it? I asked, reaching for the drive. Tasha looked me in the eye. The plan, she said. Richard explaining how to bypass the fire suppression system, Julian choosing the date, and what? And them discussing the beneficiary, she said. Richard said, he said it was a mercy. He said you were too broken to survive on your own anyway. He said the money would be better used to build the legacy. I felt a cold rage spread through my chest. It wasn't surprising, but hearing it confirmed by a witness made it real in a way that hurt. My father didn't just kill me for money, he rationalized it as an act of kindness. Give it to me, I said. Tasha dropped the USB drive into my hand. It felt light, cold. It contained the end of the Sterling Empire. One more thing, Tasha said. She stood up, wiping her face. She regained a shred of her composure. The account in the Caymans, the one you found. Yes, I said, standing up with her. It is not embezzlement, she said. It is my escape fund. I have been planning to leave Julian for a year. He hits me, Chloe. When he loses at gambling, he comes home and he hits me. She pulled up the sleeve of her coat. There were bruises on her wrist, old ones, yellow and green. I looked at the bruises, then I looked at her face. For a moment, we weren't enemies. We were just two women who had been damaged by the same toxic men. I won't report the account, I said. Consider it your severance package. Thank you, she whispered. She got into her car. She didn't look back. She slammed the door and started the engine. The Range Rover roared to life and peeled out of the garage, leaving me standing in the exhaust fumes. I looked at the USB drive in my hand. I closed my fingers around it. I had them. I had the voice of the devil himself explaining how to burn his daughter alive. I walked to the elevator. My steps were light. The alliance was made. Tasha was safe for now. But Richard and Julian were walking dead men. They just didn't know it yet. I needed to get to a secure terminal. I needed to listen to this. And then I needed to prepare for the final act. The charity gala was tomorrow night, the Phoenix Gala, to raise money for fire victims. It was the perfect stage. They wanted a show. They wanted to play the grieving family. I was going to give them a performance they would never forget. I pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed. The audit was complete. Now it was time for the presentation. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel smelled of white lilies and hypocrisy. From the back seat of the unmarked black SUV, I watched the valet parking line. It was a parade of Bentleys and Aston Martins. My father had named the event the Phoenix Gala. The tagline printed on the heavy cardstock invitations was "Rising from the Ashes Together." It was a masterclass in branding. He was using the charred remains of my life to solicit donations from the Seattle elite, and the worst part was that it was working. I adjusted the collar of my blazer. I wasn't wearing the trench coat tonight. I was wearing a sharp navy blue suit I had bought with Tasha's money. It was tailored armor. Beside me, Detective Miller checked his service weapon. In the front seat, 2 agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation sat in silence, Agent Henderson and Agent Ross. They were not here for the champagne. They were here because I had spent the last 12 hours walking them through a digital paper trail that connected the Sterling Empire to arson, wire fraud, and organized crime. "Ready?" Ms. Sterling, Agent Henderson asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. His voice was calm. He was a man who had taken down cartels. A corrupt real estate family was a light Tuesday for him. "I am ready," I said. My voice was steady. I looked at the entrance one more time. I saw my mother Sylvia greeting guests. She was wearing a red dress. Not just any red. It was the exact shade of a flame. The irony was so thick I could taste it. She was laughing, touching the arm of the mayor. She played the part of the benevolent matriarch perfectly. She had probably spent the morning rehearsing her sad smile in the mirror. "Let's go," Miller said, opening the door. We stepped out onto the sidewalk. The air was crisp. The valet attendants looked confused. They were used to celebrities and CEOs, not a phalanx of grim-faced law enforcement officers, surrounding a woman who was supposed to be in a mental institution. I walked in the center of the formation. I didn't look down. I looked straight ahead at the revolving brass doors. I could see the security team stationed at the entrance. My father didn't hire regular event security. He hired ex-military contractors. They were big men with earpieces and suits that struggled to contain their muscles. The head of the detail was a man named Brutus. I knew him. He had been my father's driver when I was in high school. He was loyal to the paycheck, not the law. Brutus saw me coming. He tapped his earpiece and stepped forward, blocking the path. 2 other guards moved to flank him. They formed a human wall in front of the velvet rope. "Ms. Sterling," Brutus said. His voice was a low rumble. He didn't look at the agents. He looked only at me. "You are not on the guest list. Your father gave strict instructions. This is a private event." I stopped 2 feet away from him. I didn't flinch. I didn't look for an invitation. "Hello, Brutus," I said. "You got a haircut. It looks expensive. Did my father give you a bonus for keeping the riffraff out?" "You need to leave, Chloe," Brutus said, crossing his arms. "Don't make a scene. You know I don't want to hurt you, but I will remove you physically if I have to. The family is going through a hard time." "They don't need your drama tonight." "The family is going through a hard time," I repeated. I looked past him into the warm glow of the lobby. I could hear a string quartet playing Vivaldi. I could hear the clink of crystal glasses. "It sounds like they are suffering terribly in there." Detective Miller stepped forward. He flashed his badge. "Seattle Police Department. Step aside." Brutus didn't move. He looked at the badge with disdain. "This is private property, Detective. Unless you have a warrant, you have no business here. And Ms. Sterling has been trespassed from all family properties. She is not welcome." I smiled. It was a cold, calculated smile. My father had prepared for the police. He knew Miller might show up. He probably had a judge on speed dial ready to file an injunction. But he hadn't prepared for the federal government. Agent Henderson stepped up. He didn't flash a badge. He pulled out a folded document from his jacket pocket. It wasn't a warrant. It was a witness protection authorization form signed by a federal judge. "This isn't a social call," Agent Henderson said. His voice cut through the noise of the street like a knife. "And this isn't a trespassing issue. Ms. Sterling is a cooperating witness in an ongoing federal RICO investigation. She is under the direct protection of the FBI." Brutus blinked. He looked at the paper, then at Henderson. "RICO," he muttered. That was a word that scared even the toughest mercenaries. It meant the endgame. Furthermore, Henderson continued stepping into Brutus's personal space. By blocking her entry, you are not just enforcing a private rule. You are obstructing a federal agent in the course of their duties. That is a felony that carries a 5-year minimum sentence. "Do you want to go to prison tonight, Brutus, or do you want to step aside and let us do our job?" Brutus hesitated. He looked at his earpiece. I knew my father was probably screaming in his ear right now, telling him to hold the line, telling him he would pay for the lawyers. But Brutus was a contractor. He did the math. He looked at the 4-armed officers. He looked at the determined look in my eyes. He realized that the Sterling check might clear, but it wouldn't buy him freedom from the feds. He tapped his earpiece. "I can't hold them, sir," he mumbled. "It is the feds." He stepped back. He unhooked the velvet rope. "Smart choice, Brutus," I said as I walked past him. We entered the lobby. The transition was jarring. One moment we were on the cold street. The next we were surrounded by gold leaf and marble. The noise of the party spilled out from the double doors of the ballroom ahead. I paused at the entrance to the ballroom. I needed a moment to survey the battlefield. The room was packed, 500 people, the mayor, 2 senators, the entire board of the Chamber of Commerce. My father had called in every favor. He needed this night to be a success. He needed the world to see the Sterlings as victim survivors and philanthropists. On the stage there was a giant screen. It was displaying a slideshow of photos of the burnt apartment building, photos of my brother Julian looking sad in a hard hat, and then a photo of me. It was a picture from my college graduation. I looked happy, innocent. Beneath the photo, the caption read, "The Chloe Sterling Recovery Fund." I felt a surge of nausea. He was raising money in my name. He was using the daughter he tried to kill as the poster child for his tax write-off. I scanned the room for the targets. Richard was near the bar holding court with a group of investors. Sylvia was near the stage talking to a reporter. Julian was nowhere to be seen. He was probably backstage practicing his speech or hiding in the bathroom doing lines of coke to calm his nerves. And Tasha. I saw her in the corner. She was standing alone near the emergency exit. She was holding a glass of water. She saw me come in. Her eyes widened. She gave a barely perceptible nod. She had done her part. She had unlocked the side doors for the tactical team that was currently surrounding the perimeter. I turned to Miller. "Do we take them now?" I asked. Miller shook his head. "Not yet. The DA wants the speech. We need them to publicly solicit the funds. Once Richard accepts a check for the fraudulent charity, the wire fraud charge is locked in. We need the act to be consummated. So we wait," I said. "We wait," Miller agreed. "But we make our presence known. We make them sweat." I nodded. I could do that. I walked into the ballroom. The agents flanked me like a presidential detail. We didn't weave through the crowd. We walked a straight line down the center aisle. The effect was instantaneous. A woman in a sequined gown turned to look and dropped her fork. A waiter froze with a tray of champagne. The murmur of conversation died down, spreading like a wave of silence from the door to the stage. My mother saw me first. She was in the middle of a laugh. The laugh died in her throat. Her hand flew to her pearl necklace. Her eyes darted from me to the agents behind me. I saw the color drain from her face. She looked like a ghost in a red dress. Then Richard saw me. He was raising a glass to toast an investor. He lowered the glass slowly. His face didn't show fear. It showed fury, pure, unadulterated rage. He glared at Brutus, who was standing helplessly by the door. Then he glared at me. I stopped in the middle of the room. I was 20 feet away from my father. The silence was deafening. The string quartet trailed off uncertainly. I looked at my father. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. I just stared at him with the cold, analytical gaze of an auditor who had found a massive discrepancy in the ledger. He took a step toward me. His face was purple. "What is the meaning of this?" he hissed. His voice echoed in the silent room. "Get out! You are disturbing the guests. You are sick, Chloe. Go back to the hospital." He was trying to stick to the script. He was trying to play the concerned father dealing with a lunatic daughter. I didn't answer him. I looked at the screen. I looked at my own face smiling down on the crowd. Then I looked at the crowd. I saw the confusion in their eyes. They were looking at the crazy daughter they had heard about on the news, but they didn't see a crazy person. They saw a woman in a tailored suit standing with the FBI. Cognitive dissonance began to ripple through the room. Richard signaled for security, but the security guard saw the federal badges and stayed put. Richard was alone. I checked my watch. 8:00 p.m. The speeches were scheduled to start in 2 minutes. Julian was supposed to come out and introduce the fund. I turned to Agent Henderson. "Is the audio patch ready?" Henderson nodded and touched his earpiece. "We are tapped into the house system. Just give the signal." I looked back at my father. He was sweating now. He realized he had lost control of the room. He realized that his fortress of lies had been breached. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said. My voice wasn't amplified, but in the dead silence of the ballroom it carried to the back row. I apologize for the interruption. I know you paid $5,000 a plate to hear a story about a tragedy. I paused. I let the words hang there. But I think there has been a mistake in the program, I continued. The story you were told is incomplete, and since I am the subject of that photo on the screen, I thought I should be the one to finish it. My father lunged forward. "Cut her mic!" he screamed at the sound booth. "She doesn't have a mic, you idiot! Get her out of here!" But no one moved. The crowd was captivated. This was better than a speech. This was a scandal unfolding in real time. I walked toward the stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I walked up the stairs. I stood at the podium. I looked down at my parents. Sylvia was shaking. Richard was breathing hard like a bull ready to charge. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the USB drive Tasha had given me. I held it up. It caught the light of the chandeliers. My father's eyes locked onto the small silver drive. He knew what it was. He recognized Tasha's keychain. I saw the moment of realization hit him, the moment he realized the call wasn't coming from outside the house. It was coming from inside. I plugged the drive into the laptop on the podium. The screen on the stage flickered. My graduation photo disappeared. It was replaced by a black screen with a single audio file waveform. I leaned into the microphone. "You wanted to raise money for the fire," I said. "Let's hear how the fire really started." I pressed the space bar. The room held its breath. The audit was over. The sentencing was about to begin. My father, Richard Sterling, was a man who had built his entire life on the ability to control the narrative. He saw me standing at the podium. He saw the USB drive in the laptop. He saw the federal agents standing guard at the base of the stairs. For a split second, I saw the animal panic in his eyes, but then his training kicked in. He realized that physical force was useless. He couldn't drag me off the stage without looking like a monster. So he decided to use the only weapon he had left, his voice. He stepped forward to the edge of the stage. He grabbed a handheld microphone from a stand. He turned his back to me and faced the crowd. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked devastated. He looked like a grieving father dealing with a public breakdown. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cracking with perfect theatrical emotion. "I am so sorry you have to witness this. My daughter Chloe has been battling severe mental health issues for a long time. We tried to keep it private. We tried to protect her dignity, but the fire, the trauma of the accident, it has pushed her over the edge." He gestured toward me with a trembling hand. He didn't look at me. He looked at the donors. He looked at the mayor. "She doesn't know what she is doing," he continued. "She creates these fantasies, these conspiracy theories. It is a symptom of her condition. She thinks her family is the enemy because we are the ones trying to get her help. Please bear with us while we get her the medical attention she needs. Security, please escort my daughter to the car gently. She is fragile." The crowd murmured in sympathy. I saw heads nodding. I saw pity in their eyes. He was good. He was incredibly good. In 2 minutes, he had turned my carefully planned exposure into a medical emergency. He was gaslighting 500 of the smartest people in Seattle, and they were buying it. I stood behind the podium. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't scream that he was a liar. I let him talk. I let him dig the hole. Every word he said about my mental state was just another shovel of dirt that was about to fall on his own grave. I looked at the laptop screen. The file was loaded. I had spent the last 2 hours with the FBI tech team syncing the audio from Tasha's recording with the silent CCTV footage from the coffee shop. It was a multimedia presentation of a homicide attempt. Richard was still talking. He was gaining confidence. He thought he had won the room back. "We love you, Chloe," he said, turning to look at me with sad eyes. "We forgive you. Just come down from there, honey. We will go home. We will fix this." I looked at him. I leaned into the podium microphone. "You are right, Dad," I said. My voice was calm, cold, and amplified by the massive speakers hanging from the ceiling. "We should fix this. But before we go home, I think the donors deserve to know exactly what they are funding. You said this was a charity for fire victims. Let's look at the cause of the fire." I hit the enter key. Richard lunged for me. "Cut the feed," he screamed, losing his composure instantly. "Turn it off. Don't listen to her." But it was too late. The massive LED screen behind us, which had been displaying my smiling graduation photo, went black for a heartbeat. Then it exploded into light. The video footage from the alleyway appeared. It was grainier than high definition, but on a 30-foot screen, every detail was magnified. The timestamp in the corner read 2:14 a.m. The ballroom went silent. 500 pairs of eyes were glued to the screen. They saw the figure in the hoodie walking down the alley. They saw the confident bounce in his step. Then the audio kicked in. It wasn't the ambient noise of the street. It was a crystal-clear voice recording overlaying the video. It was Richard's voice. "The timeline is tight, Julian. The insurance premium is paid up through Friday. If we wait until the weekend, the policy lapses. It has to be Tuesday." On the screen, the figure stopped at the door. He pulled out the key fob. The crowd gasped. They recognized the voice. It was the same man who had just been professing his love for his daughter. Richard stood frozen on the stage. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at the screen like it was a monster that had come to eat him. The audio continued. Now it was Julian's voice, whiny and petulant. "But she is always home on Tuesday nights, Dad. She works late. What if she's inside?" The figure on the screen tapped the fob. The door opened. He turned to the camera. He pulled down his mask to light the cigarette. The flame illuminated Julian's face. It was 10 feet tall on the screen. Every guest in the room saw it. The weak chin, the arrogance. The identity was undeniable. Then came the voice of Richard again. The voice that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The voice that I played for the jury of public opinion. "I know she is inside, Julian. That is the point. The policy pays double for accidental death. If she is not there, we only get $5 million. If she dies, we get 10. A collective sound of horror swept through the room. It was a physical reaction. People recoiled. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hand. The mayor took a step back from the table as if the tablecloth was contaminated. On the screen, Julian took a drag of his cigarette. He looked bored. "Okay," Julian's voice said on the tape. "But what if she wakes up?" "She is a light sleeper," Richard's voice replied. It was cold, businesslike. The voice of a man ordering a shipment of lumber, not the execution of his child. "Use the accelerant. Pour it on the closet door. And Julian, make sure you lock the main door from the outside. Use the deadbolt. I don't want her running out into the hallway. Burn it all. Make it look like an accident. The money will be in the account by Monday morning." The audio ended. The video froze on Julian's face, lit by the lighter. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating. The air conditioning hummed, but no one breathed. I looked at my father. He wasn't acting anymore. He was a statue of ruin. He looked at the crowd. He looked for an ally. He looked for someone who would believe his lie, but there was no one. The elite of Seattle were looking at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. They weren't looking at a philanthropist. They were looking at a butcher. I leaned into the microphone one last time. "My name is Chloe Sterling," I said. My voice didn't waver, and that is why I am not sitting at the family table tonight, because the table was paid for with my life insurance policy. I stepped back from the podium. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The shock was too great. The cognitive dissonance of seeing a pillar of the community exposed as a monster paralyzed them. Then the sound of a glass breaking shattered the spell. Someone dropped a champagne flute. And then the chaos began. My mother Sylvia, who had been standing near the stage, let out a sound that wasn't human. It was a shriek of denial. She tried to run toward the exit, but she tripped over the train of her red dress. She fell to the floor, scrambling on her hands and knees. Richard turned to me. His eyes were red. He looked like he wanted to kill me right there on the stage. He took a step toward me, his hands forming into fists. "You ungrateful bitch!" he roared. "I gave you everything. I gave you life." He didn't finish the sentence. Agent Henderson and Agent Ross moved with terrifying speed. They tackled him. It wasn't a polite arrest. They slammed him onto the hardwood floor of the stage. The microphone stand toppled over with a deafening screech of feedback. "Stop resisting!" Henderson shouted. "Richard Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and racketeering." I watched from above. I watched my father's face pressed against the floorboards. I watched his expensive tuxedo tear at the shoulder. I watched the handcuffs click around his wrists. He looked up at me. He wasn't crying. He was looking at me with confusion. He couldn't understand how the variable he had tried to delete had become the architect of his destruction. I looked out at the audience. They were standing up. Some were taking photos. Some were leaving. The mayor was speaking frantically to his security detail, distancing himself from the toxicity. The Sterling name, which had been gold in this city for 50 years, had turned to ash in less than 5 minutes. I looked at the screen again. The image of Julian holding the lighter was still there. It was the receipts, the ultimate receipt. I walked down the stairs of the stage. I walked past my mother, who was sobbing on the floor, claiming she didn't know, claiming she was innocent. I didn't stop to comfort her. I walked past the donors who parted for me with fear and awe. I walked toward the exit. I wasn't the crazy daughter anymore. I was the woman who had just burned down the house. And unlike Julian, I didn't need a match. I just used the truth. Detective Miller met me at the door. He looked at the chaos inside. He looked at Richard being dragged off the stage. He looked at me and nodded. "Nice presentation, Miss Sterling," he said. I adjusted my jacket. "Just an audit detective," I said, "just balancing the books." The ballroom was chaotic, but I was the eye of the storm. My father was pinned to the floorboards, his face pressed against the wood, struggling against the weight of 2 federal agents. My mother was on her knees, sobbing theatrically near the edge of the stage. The guests were frozen in a tableau of shock and revulsion. They were waiting for an explanation. They were waiting for me to scream or cry or deliver an emotional speech about betrayal. But I did not deal in emotions. I dealt in data. And I knew that while the video of Julian lighting the fire was visceral, it was the numbers that would ensure they never left prison. A video could be claimed as a deepfake, a confession could be recanted, but a bank transfer is eternal. I turned back to the laptop on the podium. I typed in a command. The image of Julian's face on the giant screen dissolved. It was replaced by a complex spiderweb of financial transactions. It looked like a map of a subway system, but the stations were shell companies, and the trains were millions of dollars of illicit cash. I leaned into the microphone. My voice was the only sound in the room. You are probably wondering why I said the receipts are the story I began. You just watched a video of my brother trying to kill me. But murder was not the goal. Murder was just a line item expense. The goal was solvency. I pressed a key. A document zoomed in on the screen. It was a tax return for Sterling Estate Holdings from last year. It showed a loss of $10 million. Then I pressed another key. A second document appeared next to it. It was a ledger from a bank in the Seychelles. It showed a balance of $45 million. I looked at the crowd. I looked directly at the mayor. For the last 10 years, my father, Richard Sterling, has been crying poverty to the IRS, I said. He laid off 300 workers claiming the economy was bad. He cut pensions. He stopped maintaining his buildings, which is why my apartment block had no working sprinklers. But the money did not vanish. It moved. I pointed to the screen. $45 million, I read aloud. That is the amount of tax revenue stolen from the city of Seattle. That is money that should have gone to schools and roads and fire departments. Instead, it went to a shell company called Blue Heron LLC. And do you know who the sole signatory of Blue Heron is? I looked down at my father. He stopped struggling. He looked up at me with dead eyes. "It is Richard Sterling," I said. The crowd gasped. The mayor looked furious. He had just realized he had been shaking hands with a man who had robbed the city blind. "But tax evasion is boring," I continued. "Let's talk about the charity, the Phoenix Fund." I clicked the remote. The screen changed again. It showed the donation page for the gala we were currently attending. Then it showed the back-end routing numbers. "You all wrote checks tonight thinking you were helping fire victims," I said. "You thought you were rebuilding homes, but look at the routing number." I highlighted the sequence of digits in red. This account does not belong to a nonprofit organization. It belongs to Ironclad Logistics, a company owned by the Vargas crime syndicate. A woman in the front row dropped her purse. The room began to vibrate with whispers. $12 million, I said. That is the amount of drug money that has been washed through this fund in the last 3 years. My family did not start this charity to help people. They started it to help the cartel clean their cash. Every dollar you donated tonight was going to be used to pay off gambling debts and buy silence. I paused. I let the weight of that sink in. The elite of Seattle were not just victims of a scam, they were accessories to money laundering. And finally, I said, my voice dropped an octave, let's talk about the price of a human life. I put the insurance policy on the screen. It was the document that had started it all. The document that had turned me from a daughter into a target. Sterling Estate Holdings is bankrupt, I said. My father lied to the investors. He lied to Amazon. The company has zero liquidity. They needed a cash injection by this Monday or the house of cards would fall. They couldn't get a loan. They couldn't sell assets. So they decided to liquidate the only asset they had left that was worth more dead than alive. Me. I read the numbers from the screen. $5 million for natural death. $10 million for accidental death involving fire. I looked at my mother. She was still on the floor, but she had stopped crying. She was staring at me with a look of pure hatred. She wasn't sorry. She was just angry that the transaction had failed. They didn't hate me, I said. They didn't even dislike me. They just did the math. My life was the only way to balance the books. They tried to burn me alive because $10 million was exactly enough to cover the interest payments on the money they stole. I closed the laptop. The screen went black. The audit is complete, I said. The discrepancies have been resolved. I stepped back from the podium. That was the signal. Detective Miller spoke into his radio. Execute, he said. The doors to the ballroom burst open. 24 uniformed police officers flooded the room. They didn't move toward the crowd. They moved toward the family. Agent Ross hauled my father to his feet. Richard was limp. The fight had gone out of him. He looked old and small. As they dragged him past the stage, he didn't look at me. He looked at the floor. You have the right to remain silent, Ross recited. But I think your daughter has already done all the talking for you. My mother. Sylvia tried to stand up. She smoothed her dress. She looked at the officers approaching her with indignation. Do not touch me, she shrieked. I didn't sign anything. I didn't know. I am a victim here. He made me do it. Officer, capture that statement, Miller shouted. An officer grabbed Sylvia's wrists. She screamed as the handcuffs clicked into place. It was a sharp metallic sound that cut through the room. Get your hands off me, she yelled. I am Sylvia Sterling. I am a pillar of this community. Chloe, tell them. Tell them I had nothing to do with it. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had gone on television and called me insane. I can't tell them that, Mother, I said calmly, because the forensic accounting shows you spent the insurance payout before I was even dead. You put a deposit down on a vacation home in Tuscany 3 days ago, using the anticipated funds from my death benefit. Sylvia's mouth fell open. She had forgotten about the deposit. The paper trail never forgets. They dragged her away screaming obscenities that made the socialites cover their ears. Then there was Julian. He had been hiding behind a curtain near the backstage exit. He thought he was invisible, but there is no hiding place in a verified audit. 2 officers pulled him out. He was crying. Not silent tears, but loud heaving sobs. He looked like a child. He looked like the pathetic gambler he was. It wasn't my idea, he wailed as they cuffed him. Dad told me to do it. Tasha told me how to hide the money. I just lit the match. I just did what I was told. He looked at me as they marched him past the podium. Chloe, help me, he begged. I am your brother. We played together. Please, I don't want to go to prison. They will kill me in there. I looked at him. I remembered the boy who used to steal my toys. I remembered the man who lit a cigarette while my apartment burned. You should have thought about that before you became a liability, Julian, I said. They took them all. The Sterling family was paraded out of their own gala in handcuffs. The flashbulbs from the press photographers who had slipped inside went off like strobe lights. It was the photo op of the decade, the fall of the House of Sterling. The room was still buzzing with energy. The guests were shell-shocked, but amidst the chaos, one person was standing perfectly still. Tasha. She was standing in the corner near the emergency exit where she had been the whole time. She wasn't being arrested. She wasn't being handcuffed. She held a glass of water in her hand. She looked at Julian being dragged away. She looked at Richard and Sylvia. Her face was unreadable. Then she looked at me. Our eyes met across the ballroom. She gave an almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of friendship. It was a nod of transaction. She had provided the recording. She had unlocked the doors. And in exchange, she was walking out of here a free woman. She would lose the money. She would lose the status. But she would keep her freedom. I nodded back. The deal was concluded. Detective Miller walked up to me on the stage. He looked at the empty spot where my father had been pinned. Then he looked at the crowd. "We need to clear the room, Ms. Sterling," he said. "We need to process the scene. You need to come with us to the station to sign the final statements." I nodded. I picked up the USB drive from the podium. I walked down the stairs. The crowd parted for me again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was respect. I walked out of the ballroom. I walked past the table where the check-in list was. I saw my name, Chloe Sterling, do not admit. I reached out and picked up a pen. I drew a line through my name. Then I wrote in neat block letters next to it, "Case closed." I walked out into the cool night air. The sirens were wailing. The blue lights painted the streets of Seattle. I took a deep breath. I didn't have a home. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a family. But I had the truth. And for the first time in my life, I was completely in the black. I got into the back of the agent's car. "Where to now?" Henderson asked. I looked out the window at the city skyline. "Somewhere fireproof," I said. The drive to the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan took 3 hours. It was a gray facility surrounded by razor wire and vast empty fields. It looked nothing like the country clubs my parents used to frequent, but in a way it was the first honest home they had ever inhabited. There were no marble facades here to hide the rot. Everything was exposed. Concrete, steel, and consequences. I walked through the metal detector. The guard checked my ID. He didn't look at me with recognition. To him, I was just another visitor coming to see a number. I liked that. For 6 months, I had been the girl on the news, the girl who took down the Sterling Empire. But today, I wasn't a celebrity. I was just a woman, coming to inspect a closed account. I sat in the visitation room. It was loud. Families were crying, holding hands across the table. Children were playing on the dirty linoleum floor. I sat perfectly still. I had requested a special block of time to see them all. My lawyer, Tasha, had arranged it before she left for a non-extradition country with her immunity deal. She was good at paperwork until the very end. Julian came out first. I almost didn't recognize him. The Julian I knew wore Italian suits and had a manicure every Friday. The man shuffling toward the chair wore a beige jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. His head was shaved, but it was his face that told the real story. His left eye was swollen shut. His lip was split. There was a jagged scratch running down his neck that looked infected. He sat down. He didn't say hello. He leaned forward and whispered urgently into the phone, "Chloe, you have to help me. They know who I am. They know we had money." I looked at him through the thick plexiglass. I picked up the receiver. My voice was calm. "We don't have money, Julian. The government seized everything. You know that." Julian started to cry. It was a pathetic, wet sound. "You don't understand. The gang's in here. They think I have a stash. They think I can access offshore accounts. I told them I can't, but they don't believe me. They charge me tax, Chloe. They take my food. They beat me if I don't pay. I need you to put money in my commissary account. Please, just $500 a week. That is all I need to stop the beatings." I looked at his bruises. I remembered the video of him lighting the cigarette. I remembered him laughing at the dinner table while I was homeless. $500, I repeated. "That is a lot of money, Julian. That is almost exactly what my deductible was for the smoke damage to my clothes." He slammed his hand against the glass. "Don't be a bitch, Chloe. I am your brother. I am going to die in here." I leaned in closer. The glass fogged up with his desperate breath. "You aren't going to die, Julian. You are just learning about the economy. You spent your whole life spending money you didn't earn. Now you are in a place where your last name is worthless. Consider this your first real job." I hung up the phone. I signaled the guard. "Take him away," Julian screamed as they dragged him back to the cell block. He was shouting that he was sorry. He was shouting that he was afraid. I watched him go. I felt nothing. No pity, No anger, just the satisfaction of a balanced equation. He had tried to sell my life for a profit. Now he was paying for his own survival. Next came Sylvia. My mother walked in like she was entering a spa. She had modified her jumpsuit. She had rolled the sleeves and popped the collar. She had managed to find some kind of red dye for her lips, probably from candy or berries. She sat down and smiled a tight, delusional smile. "Chloe, darling," she said, picking up the phone. "You look tired. Are you eating enough? I worry about you." I stared at her. She was serving 20 years for racketeering, and she was still playing the role of the concerned matriarch. "I am fine, Mother," I said. "I am sleeping very well, actually." "Good," she said. "Listen, I need you to contact the appellate lawyer. There has been a mistake with the venue. This facility is substandard, the sheets are polyester, and the food is carb-heavy. I need to be transferred to the minimum security camp in Connecticut. I have friends there." She spoke as if she were booking a hotel room. She was completely detached from reality. She created a world in her head where this was just a temporary inconvenience. "There is no appeal." "Mother," I said, "the evidence was irrefutable. You are not going to Connecticut. You are staying here until you are 78 years old." Sylvia's smile faltered. Her eyes darted around the room. "Don't be cruel," she whispered. "We did it for the family. We did it for the legacy. You will understand when you have children. You do whatever it takes to survive." I stood up. I didn't want to hear her justifications. Her narcissism was a black hole that had swallowed my childhood. I wasn't going to let it swallow my future. "I won't have children, Mother," I said, "at least not the kind you raised. I am breaking the cycle." I put the phone down. She tapped on the glass, blowing me a kiss. She was insane, and she was exactly where she belonged. Finally, Richard walked in. The change in him was the most drastic. He had lost 30 pounds. His skin was gray. The arrogance that had fueled him for 60 years was gone, replaced by a simmering rage that seemed to vibrate off him. He sat down heavily. He glared at me. He didn't pick up the phone at first. We just stared at each other. The father who tried to kill me, and the daughter who buried him. Finally, he snatched the receiver. "Are you happy?" he spat. His voice was raspy. "You destroyed everything. 3 generations of sterling legacy. Gone. Because you couldn't take a hint. Because you had to be the smart one." I nodded. "Yes, I am happy. And I didn't destroy the legacy, Richard. I just audited it. It was bankrupt long before I got there." He leaned forward. His eyes narrowed. "You think you won," he hissed. "You have nothing. You are a pariah. No one will hire you. No one will marry you. You are the girl who sent her own family to prison. You are alone, Chloe. You are homeless. You are nothing without the name I gave you." I smiled. It was a genuine smile. "Actually," I said, "I have some news. I thought you might want to know about the estate." His eyes widened. "The house, the Medina mansion." It was the only thing he truly loved. "The bank auctioned it off yesterday," I said. "It was a foreclosure sale. The market is tough right now, especially for properties with such a scandalous history. No one wanted to buy the house where the Sterling monsters lived." Richard gripped the phone tighter. "Who bought it?" he demanded. "Some tech billionaire? Some Californian?" "No," I said. I paused for effect. "I bought it." Richard froze. You don't have the money." "I do now," I said. "After the trial, I sold my story rights for a book and a movie deal, and I used the whistleblower reward from the IRS. It was substantial. Since you evaded $45 million in taxes, my cut was 15%. "Do the math, Richard." His face turned purple. "I bought the debt," I continued. "I paid $1.2 million. That is 1/10 of what you said it was worth. It turns out the foundation was cracking. Just like your business." "You can't," he screamed. He stood up, knocking the chair over. "That is my house. I built that house. You can't live there. You are not worthy of it." "I am not just going to live there," I said calmly. "I am going to renovate. I am burning the furniture, Richard. All of it. The desk where you planned my murder. The bed where you slept while I was homeless. I am having a bonfire in the backyard." "I am your father!" he roared, slamming his fist against the glass. The guard took a step forward. I looked him dead in the eye. No, I said. You are inmate number 8940, and I am the owner of the house you will never step foot in again. I hung up the phone. Richard was screaming. He was shouting obscenities. He was spitting at the glass. He looked like a wild animal caught in a trap. The guards grabbed him. They wrestled him to the ground. I watched for a moment. I watched the man who had terrified me for 29 years being subdued by a 20-year-old guard. He looked small. He looked pathetic. I turned around and walked out of the visitation room. I walked out into the sunlight. The air smelled of rain and freedom. I walked to my car. It wasn't a rental anymore. It was a new Tesla. I got in and punched the address into the navigation. Home. I had a lot of work to do. The bonfire was scheduled for tonight, and I needed to buy paint. I was thinking green. A soft, healing green for the master bedroom. The Sterling Empire was dead. But my life was just beginning, and the view from the top was going to be spectacular. The sound of a sledgehammer hitting a plaster wall is surprisingly similar to the sound of a gavel hitting a judge's bench. It is final. It is loud. And it signifies the end of an argument. I stood in the center of the grand foyer of the Medina estate, watching the construction crew dismantle the West Wing. This was the wing where my mother used to host her tea parties, the wing where she would sit and critique my posture and my career choices. Now it was a pile of rubble and dust. I wasn't just renovating, I was exercising. I walked through the debris wearing a hard hat and my signature navy blazer. The house was mine now. The deed was recorded in the name of my new LLC, Phoenix Audit and Security. I had paid $1.2 million for a property that was once valued at $12 million. The bank was happy to get rid of it. They wanted to erase the stain of the Sterling scandal from their portfolio. I didn't mind the stain. I bought the stain, and now I was scrubbing it out. I stopped in front of the main staircase. Hanging on the wall was the massive oil portrait of the family. It was 10 feet tall. It showed Richard standing proudly with his hand on a globe, Sylvia sitting on a velvet chair looking regal, Julian standing behind her with a golf club, and me. I was painted in the background. My figure was smaller. My lighting was dimmer. Even in oil paint, they had marginalized me. I turned to the foreman, a burly man named Mike, who had been hesitant to take the job because of the rumors. "Mike," I said, pointing to the painting, "take it down." Mike looked at the massive frame. "That is a heavy piece, Miss Sterling. You want us to put it in storage?" "No," I said. "I want you to put it in the wood chipper." Mike blinked. "The frame is gold leaf. It is probably worth $5,000. I pulled a checkbook out of my pocket. I wrote a check for $5,000. I handed it to him. "Now it is paid for," I said. "Shred it. I want to see the sawdust." Mike took the check. He nodded. He signaled two of his guys. They climbed the ladders. They unhooked the heavy frame. It crashed to the floor with a satisfying thud. The canvas ripped. Richard's face was torn down the middle. I watched them drag it out to the industrial shredder in the driveway. The machine roared. The Sterling family legacy was reduced to confetti in 30 seconds. I turned away. I walked into what used to be the formal dining room. The long mahogany table was gone. The crystal chandelier was gone. The room was now filled with rows of sleek modern desks and high-end computer servers. This was the headquarters of my new company. We specialized in forensic audits for high-net-worth divorces and corporate fraud. I had hired 10 of the best analysts in the city. We were already booked solid for the next year. The scandal hadn't hurt my reputation. It had made me a legend. Everyone wanted the woman who took down her own father to find their missing money. I walked to the corner desk. It was the smallest desk in the room. It was situated near the printer. A woman was sitting there typing furiously. She was wearing a simple gray sweater and slacks from Target. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun. She looked tired. She looked older. "Hello, Tasha," I said. Tasha looked up. She stopped typing. She didn't glare at me. She just looked resigned. "Ms. Sterling," she said. She used my last name. It was part of the agreement. Professional boundaries. "How is the data entry going?" I asked. Slowly, she said, rubbing her wrist. The files from the Kensington case are a mess. They tried to hide assets in crypto. I am tracing the wallet addresses now. I nodded. Keep digging. If you find the link, you get a $50 bonus. Tasha nodded. Thank you. I need it. My rent is due on Tuesday. I watched her for a moment. Tasha, the high-powered attorney. Tasha, who used to drive a Range Rover and mock my shoes. She had been disbarred immediately after the trial. Her immunity deal kept her out of prison, but it didn't save her career. She was unhireable. No firm wanted a lawyer who turned on her clients. She had lost her house. She had lost her status. She came to me 3 months ago. She was living in a studio apartment smaller than the one I used to have. She asked for a job, any job. I hired her, not out of charity, but because she was meticulous, and because I needed someone to do the grunt work. I paid her a fair wage, $15 an hour. It was exactly minimum wage. It was the ultimate correction. She was working for the woman she tried to bribe. She was inputting data for the auditor she tried to destroy. Do you regret it, Tasha? I asked suddenly. She paused. She looked at the screen. She looked at the rows of numbers. Regret what she asked, turning on them, giving me the drive. Tasha laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. I regret marrying into this family, she said. I regret thinking that money was the same thing as safety. But giving you that drive? No, that is the only smart thing I ever did. She looked out the window at the garden where the landscapers were tearing up Sylvia's prize-winning roses. Julian called me yesterday, she said quietly. From prison. He wanted me to put money on his books. He said he would pay me back when he gets out. I raised an eyebrow. What did you say? Tasha smiled. A small, genuine smile. I told him I couldn't help him. I told him my assets were frozen. And then I hung up. Good, I said. You are learning. I walked away from her desk. I walked toward the back of the house, toward the library. Tasha went back to typing. The click, click, click of the keyboard was the rhythm of her new life. She was paying her debt, one keystroke at a time. I walked down the hallway. The walls were bare. I had stripped the silk wallpaper. I had removed the sconces. The house felt lighter. It felt like a blank canvas. I reached the heavy oak doors of the library. This was Richard's sanctuary. This was the room where no one was allowed to enter without knocking. This was the room where the air used to smell of expensive cigars and secrets. I pushed the doors open. The room was empty. I had sold the books. I had sold the leather chairs. The only thing left was the wall safe behind the paneling. The safe that Richard had screamed about during the arrest. He hadn't cared about the bank accounts. He hadn't cared about the jewelry. But as they dragged him away, he had looked at me with wild, desperate eyes and screamed, "Don't open the wall safe, Chloe. Promise me. It is personal. It has nothing to do with the business." For 6 months, I had left it alone. I told myself I was too busy. I told myself it didn't matter. But I was an auditor. And an unopened safe is an unresolved variable. I walked to the wall. I found the hidden latch. The panel slid back, revealing the steel door of the safe. It was an old model, analog dial. I didn't need a locksmith. I knew my father. I knew his ego. I spun the dial, right to 10, left to 25, right to 60, 10/25/60, October 25th, 1960, the day he founded the company, the only day that mattered to him. The tumbler clicked, the handle turned, the heavy door swung open. I held my breath. I expected gold bars. I expected a stash of diamonds. I expected another ledger of crimes. But the safe was almost empty. There was only a single large envelope sitting on the metal shelf. It was yellowed with age. On the front, written in Richard's handwriting, was a single word, Chloe. I reached in and took the envelope. My hands were steady. I walked to the window. The light was streaming in. The dust motes danced in the air. I opened the clasp. I pulled out the document inside. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a deed. It was a certificate of adoption from the state of Washington, dated 29 years ago. Subject baby girl Doe. Adoptive parents, Richard and Sylvia Sterling. Status ward of the state. Placement private adoption. I stared at the paper. The world stopped spinning. I read the attached caseworker notes. The adoptive parents are seeking a second child to complete their public image. The mother is unable to conceive again. They have requested a girl. Specific criteria: must be healthy, must not have genetic defects. I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't a Sterling. I was a prop. I was acquired because a rich couple needed a balanced family photo for the society pages. They needed a girl to match the boy. That explained the coldness. That explained why I never felt like I fit in. That explained why Julian was the golden child despite his incompetence. He was their blood. He was their DNA. I was just an acquisition, a merger. And when the acquisition stopped being profitable, they decided to liquidate it. I felt a tear run down my cheek. But it wasn't sadness. It was relief. It was a wave of pure, overwhelming relief that washed over me like a baptism. I wasn't one of them. I didn't share their blood. I didn't carry their genetic marker for cruelty. I didn't have their rot inside me. I had spent my whole life wondering what was wrong with me, wondering why I couldn't be like them, wondering why I couldn't make them love me. But it wasn't my failure. It was just a bad contract. I looked at the signature on the bottom of the certificate. Richard Sterling. He had bought me, and he had tried to sell me to an insurance company. To him, I was never a human being. I was just inventory. I laughed. I laughed out loud in the empty room. The sound bounced off the walls. "I am free," I whispered. "I am really free." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a box of matches. I struck a match. The flame flared up bright and hot. I held the corner of the adoption certificate to the flame. The paper caught instantly. The fire curled the edges, turning the legal words into black ash. I watched the name Richard Sterling burn. I watched the name Sylvia Sterling burn. I dropped the burning paper onto the concrete floor. I watched it turn into a pile of gray dust. I wasn't Chloe Sterling the victim. I wasn't Chloe Sterling the daughter. I was just Chloe, and I could be anyone I wanted. I took out my phone. I dialed the number for the architect who was handling the renovation. He answered on the first ring. "Ms. Sterling, how can I help you?" "Hi, David," I said. "I want to make a change to the plans for the master suite." "Of course," he said. "What do you have in mind?" I looked at the pile of ash on the floor. I looked out the window at the new world waiting for me. "Tear down the wood framing," I said. "All of it. I want to rebuild with steel and concrete. I want reinforced glass. I want a halon suppression system in every room." I paused. I smiled. "Design it so it can never burn," I said. "I want a house that is fireproof." I hung up the phone. I stepped on the ashes, grinding them into the floor. Then I turned around and walked out of the library. I walked back to the main room. I walked past Tasha. I walked past the new map on the wall. I walked out the front door into the sun. The audit was finally closed, the books were balanced, and my net worth was infinite.